and I would request you guys to come up and say hi. So the first speaker that I would like to speak about is Mr. Rahul Pagidipati. He is the CEO of Zeppe, India's biggest Bitcoin exchange. He is also managing partner at Aeon Capital. Rahul co-founded the Freedom Health, which is become the largest private health insurance company in America with an annual revenue of 1.8 billion US dollars. Anthem Healthcare acquired Freedom Healthcare in 2018. Along with his family office, Rahul has led investments in unicorn healthcare companies, including Oscar Health, RX Advance, and Rise, which is acquired by One Medical. Rahul has an MBA from Northwestern School of Kellogg and Law of Management. He is a licensed attorney in the state of Florida and currently working as a partner at a corporate and bankruptcy law firm. Rahul, please come up and say hi to the batch.
Hey everyone, great to meet you. Really excited to be here. Thanks Vishy for kind of introducing me into this stuff. I've been a big fan of India, and I am Ahmedabad, so very pumped to be talking to you guys. I was in business school, I don't know, maybe about 15 years ago. So really excited to share what I've learned over the past, let's say, several decades.
Welcome, Rahul.
Thanks.
Welcome, Rahul, and thank you for spending this evening with us. I just want to say a special thanks to Rahul because it's 6 a.m. in the US right now, and he's still volunteered to wake up at the VRs and join us.
Thanks.
Okay, let's move on to the second speaker. We have with us Mr. David Zakam. David is the Vice President and Head of Analytics at Swiggy. He has 17 plus years of work experience in analytics and data science. At Swiggy, David's teams focus on problems in hyperlocal delivery and the food tech space. The teams are working on providing better customer service, ensuring safety of everyone involved, helping restaurants grow insights, ensuring drivers get food pay for their work, providing discounts, reducing cost of delivery, and evaluating new business models. Prior to Swiggy, David was at Mu Sigma, where he was consulted at 23 companies across 9 verticals, led analytics teams over 450 people, and managed senior client relationships in Europe and US. Interestingly, he started his career as a scientist writing algorithms to identify drugs using computers. He is a graduate from IIT Delhi and IIM Calcutta. Outside of analytics, Rahul's interests are on the creative side and include playing the drums, singing, learning new languages, and sports. So I'd like to introduce Mr. David Zakam.
Thank you so much for having me. So just like Rahul was saying, right, I was trying to get into MBA way back in 2003 and 2004. The only college where I couldn't get into was IIM Ahmedabad. Okay, so I'm happy to say finally that I made it to IIMA. So thank you guys for having me over.
Welcome, David. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, let's move on to the third speaker we have with us, Mr. Sarajit Shah. Mr. Sarajit is a Chief Business Transformation and Digital Solutions at Tata Steel based out of Jamshedpur. Prior to this, he was the Chief Corporate Strategy in Tata Steel itself. Sarajit leads Tata Steel's digital transformation initiatives. He led the setting up of analytics COE in Tata Steel and has contributed to the creation of a business-focused digital and IT organization. Creation of a digital ecosystem, platformatization of IT, and the migration of the cloud are some of the journeys that excite him. A regular speaker in many forums like CII, NASCOM, etc., Sarajit has been featured in Business Today's 25 hottest executives under 40. Tata BSS, a top three business process management firm in India, won the prestigious Rajiv Gandhi National Quality Award for Large Scale Services Enterprise under his stewardship. Welcome, Sarajit Jha.
Hi, great to be here. Thanks for having me. And I think I echo David's sentiments. I never made it to IIM Ahmedabad, and finally my day has arrived. So I really look forward. There's a lot of very interesting alumni of IIM Ahmedabad whom I've had the opportunity to serve under in the Tata Group. And hopefully I shall not let them down today. Thank you so much for having me.
Good to have you, Sarajit.
Okay, and to the last but not the least, we have Mr. Abhishek Singh joining us today. Mr. Abhishek Singh is an IAS officer from the 1995 batch. He has a diverse experience of administration, managing law and order, implementing development programs, and policy formulation at the central government with regard to use of technology for improving governance. He is presently posted as CEO of My Governance with an additional charge of President and CEO of National E-Governance Division and is also the MD and CEO of Digital India Corporation. Abhishek Singh has served as secretary to the Agricultural Scientist Recruitment Board, Government of India, from June to September 2019. He has also worked with Nagaland as the principal secretary to the chief minister, with additional charge of principal secretary urban development and principal secretary personnel and administrative reforms. He was also home commissioner Nagaland in 2018. Apart from this, Abhishek has also served as the executive director in the Food Corporation of India, along with holding an additional charge of executive director North Zone, CVO, and FCI. Abhishek Singh did his master's in public administration from Howard Kennedy School of Government as a Mason Fellow in May 2013 and is a BTech and MTech from IIT Kanpur. He has worked in close coordination with international and multilateral agencies like DFID, UNICEF, and WHO for Child's Environment Project and Pulse Polio Eradication Program in Uttar Pradesh between 2001 and 2005. So, Mr. Abhishek Singh, please come online and say
Thank
hello.
you. Thank you for that extensive introduction, and very happy to be on this panel with the real experts. And I echo the thoughts of others who said that it's a dream to be on a panel with the IIM Ahmedabad professors and alum. And in fact, that dream was there. And I did a 2-week course with Professor Sebastian Morris on urban development. And those were like real 2 weeks of learning that I remember and cherish. So happy to be here.
Very good to have you, Abhishek.
And we have with us our very own professor, Dr. Pankaj Sethia. Dr. Pankaj Sethia is a PhD from Michigan State University and is a professor and the founding chairperson of the Center for Digital Transformation at the Indian Institute of Management, Ahmedabad. He is also an associate professor on academic leave from Sam M. Walton College of Business at the University of Arkansas. I'll ask, I'll request Professor Pankaj Sethia to take it over from here, please.
Thank you so much, Nikhil. Well, very great to have you here. When these guys asked me to be on a panel on AI, I thought, it's very exciting that our students and the finally the industry, we are thinking about some big questions. They had circulated a few questions, and I said yes because I thought that'd be really exciting to hear what the others are thinking about the topic, and maybe jointly we can develop a more nuanced understanding of some of the things that the students had come up with. Now, I did organize the topics a little bit, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. In terms of laying the structure, what I thought the topics that students have raised are largely, to me, appear to be more social and broadly developing a knowledge of AI and how it is going to influence the society, organizations, our regulations, etc. But before that, wanted to, for the purpose of the audience, just hear from all of you, what is the current state of AI in your work? In the sense, I know some of you are using it either in analytics or in in some of the manufacturing processes and what all you may be using it for. If you want to take a couple of minutes, each one of you, give us a sense of where we are in terms of actual implementations of AI, and then we can discuss the broader questions that the students had shared, which would be more futuristic about where the business is likely to head. So anyone who wants to start, I guess.
Okay, I guess I can start. I might be at one end of the spectrum when I say that at least at Swiggy, our work is pretty much impossible without AI. Okay, so it's a very core integral part of how Swiggy runs. Just for example, very simple things that you will see on the app, for example, are all run by AI. For example, when your page loads, it tells you how long it's going to take for your food to be delivered. Okay, that's run by AI. which driver should pick up the order for you, which is also run by AI. Let's say there is an issue and you ask for a refund. Okay, is that refund request fraud or is it not fraud? Also run by AI. Are all customers equal? No. Who is more valuable than the other? AI tells us that. As a fully digital company, it's very, very important to have AI running a process. So I think pretty much we'll be at one end of the extreme where a lot of our business processes are actually run by AI for us.
Very nice.
Yeah, I'll make a couple quick comments here. The first one is, so I grew up playing chess when I was a kid. I'm 42 now, and the big inflection point for me on artificial intelligence was when, Deep Think and Deep Blue were challenging, the best chess players in the world, and Garry Kasparov lost. And so what's really, kind of high level is kind of defining what artificial intelligence is, right? And what I would say is that there's all these different types of intelligence, from math to, let's say, chess to whatever. And it's making a program which can do better than basically the best human, right? So whatever you're doing for any discipline, can this program, do it maybe better than best, or better than a certain number of humans, and right? So and this can be, let's say, for what we're in, ZPay's in blockchain and Bitcoin, but a large part of our business model is people who trade, right? And so imagine building a program which can trade better than Warren Buffett, or let's say, Renaissance Technology, a quantitative trading system. And what's really cool is that software has gotten a lot better, and many companies and people have built trading systems which can do a much better job of arbitrage than a person, right? What that computer does is the computer compares prices across, let's say Bitcoin price, what we do, prices across multiple exchanges, and it builds in APIs and then connects that stuff, and then buys Bitcoin in one exchange or in one currency, sells it in another currency, and then puts in a hedge and then makes money instantly. So what's really cool is that technology like this didn't exist 10, 15, 20 years ago. And the computers and programs are getting better and better and better. And it'll just be interesting to me is over the next, let's say, decade or so, what happens when, these things become, in a sense, the market becomes very efficient. And I'm going to tie this back into from my finance class 15 years ago. Everyone always wondered, is the market efficient? And there's this idea of semi-strong efficiency, strong efficiency versus not. And I would say, to me, markets have become more and more efficient as time moves along, partly because of things like AI and technology make it happen. So
that's very good, Rahul. In fact, I'm going to come to some of the points you mentioned, because in general, in the academic sense, we often think of AI to be something that is just as good as human. And the initial tests, such as the Turing test, etc., would even say that if a large calculation is given to a computer, can it actually fake respond wrongly to simulate or tell the other person that it was actually a human, because a human would not have been able to answer such a complex calculation in a very short time. And so, but we're going to come back to that discussion of whether AI should be better than human or just about as good as human and others. And so whether AI should be just as good as human or better than that. But that's a very interesting point. We're going to come back to that. Okay, we hear a few more thoughts on that from either Abhishek or Sarojit.
Yeah, so Sarojit here, am I audible?
Yeah, sorry.
So quick points to, what kind of David said, which is about, the overall part that, digital native like Swiggy needs AI just about in everything to scale. And the point that kind of Rahul was making about which was the inflection point in the discovery of AI and in the journey of AI to him, and also how the efficient market hypothesis can be kind of used, and market arbitrage possibilities can only be located by AI and use cases thereof. So just to build on it, we in Tata Steel have got two kind of ways to look at AI. So we have a 4C and a 4D model. We say that whatever is dumb, dirty, dangerous, and dear should be done by AI or automation. And whatever is care, critical thinking, curiosity, and collaboration driven should be done by humans. And that's where going forward, we will continue to look at tasks in that sense. There's a lot of data available which says that anything that a human being can do under 5 seconds today, current technology can take care of it. Some of you may have heard of the McKinsey research, which said that it was 44%. Now it's gone up to 52% of the tasks today in the entire world can be taken up by AI. And there is but only 5% of the jobs can actually be taken off by AI because of the way the components stack in. Which is where the point of learning from the best and beating the best point that Rahul was making has large amount of significance. The second thing that we have is we've kind of come up with a model called scale. So we say that what do human beings do? Human beings sense, which is the points that is being made, which is, has the packet been delivered? Where is the packet? What needs to be traced? That can be through computer vision, that can be through sensor data, that can be through IRS satellite data, that can be through socioeconomic data that Abhishek and the government produces, etc. And how do you bring it together? Comprehending, which is making sense of all of it, which is where the right algorithm selection, etc. comes in, and acting on it, which is, in our case, in an industrial setup, it can be telling an actuator to increase the gas flow to a machine, or it can be telling a particular delivery guy that you're 5 minutes delayed and you may reprioritize this particular delivery to that one, which maximizes the customer satisfaction outcomes for a Swiggy, say. And then the human beings learn. So there's a lot of learning that goes on, whether it's going to be supervised or unsupervised or semi-supervised learning. And last but not the least, human beings experience. So the acronym SCALE, SCALE, unfolds as sensing, comprehending, acting, learning, and experiencing. And if you're able to guide that to a task, then it's AI deployable or not. And of course, there is the pre-filter of the 4Cs and the 4Ds that I just shared. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarojit. Very nice.
So, in fact, thanks a lot for the insights from Swiggy and from what Rahul said and Sarojit said. A lot of it is very much applicable in all that we do. But when we look at the government, what we have been trying to see in what ways we can leverage, number one, the data that we have and the analytics that we can run on that data to build in models which can help people and ensure that AI can be used for improving governance and for improving delivery of services. One example that I would like to cite, which we recently did, was once the COVID came and like February, March, MyGov especially started supporting Ministry of Health for COVID communications. So initially, it was a lot about like explaining simple terms which are not part of the lexicon, like quarantine and social distancing and all were not understood in the month of February. Now it's common, but it was not. So we did a lot of graphics and information with regard to analytics. We ran about who interprets what in what form, and then we try to target different users using data and kind of engagement that people have on social media and other platforms. Then what we also did was that we did build an AI chatbot on WhatsApp and also on our portals, which allowed people to query simple things about COVID, like, and they could query in any, not a menu driven one, but they could query in English and Hindi. And the sequence of questions could be different. So what we did was that we mapped what are the people, in what ways people can ask a question. The answers will be given by the system that we did, and we kept on improving the tool as we went forward. And over and above that, we have been like trying to ensure that all government departments which can use AI start using it and realize that it's not rocket science. It's something that we can do, and there are very simple applications. And happy to mention that there are several ministries in Government of India who have started implementing it. Like, for example, agriculture has started using AI for giving customized advisories to farmers in their native language. And these advisories are built on modeling, which relies on data that's available from weather data or the soil health card data or the land, the crop history data. And coupled with that, farmers are able to get real-time advices on their phone in their own language. Then the flood forecasting model that was implemented started in Patna in Bihar, and now it's being extended all across the country. Over and above the natural language processing, a lot of work has been done to ensure that people within India are able to communicate with voice-based internet, because that would really add a lot of value. Like we always say that we have like almost 600 million people on the internet, but there are another 500 plus people million people who are yet to come on it. And for them, we might have to use voice-based internet. We might have language technologies which allow people to access the net without having to learn about apps and about URLs and the browsers. So that's where a lot of value lies in. And of course, AI is being used in education a lot, in skilling, and in healthcare in particular, like the diabetic retinopathy that is been done, wherein a lot of such cases are discovered just by image processing, and people need not have an ophthalmologist in their local area, and that really helped a lot of people not go blind. Then, of course, tuberculosis is another area where diagnosis has been done with AI tools, and Ministry of Health has implemented several such projects across. The only challenge that we have is that how do we scale it up? How do we ensure that it's implemented across? And for doing that, the national strategy on AI has been built up. There's a lot of investment which is going on in promoting research in AI, and also for providing the infra that might be required for startups and tech entrepreneurs to run their algorithms. So that's what is happening all over, and in the limited way. In fact, DigiLocker project also, wherein we have implemented AI-based solution only 2 weeks back, wherein when all the mark sheets and all are put on the DigiLocker, but to download, what it does is that the tool matches the camera matches the image of the person who is downloading with the photograph on the class 10 or 12 certificate, and then only a child is able to download. And as and when the DigiLocker is now becoming the national academic repository, there will be more use of AI-based tools in order to make it secure, in order to make it more robust and more usable.
Very nice. Well, I think this gives a very good overview to our people who are on the call today to understand the various ways AI has been currently kind of harnessed and leveraged. And there is a lot of different shades of it, from very weak AI, if I may, to a very not so much generic AI. And we'll come to that. I think the students' questions were they were very keen to understand about the generic AI as well. But let me, so they shared 5 questions, I think, with us. And what I ended up doing was I ended up putting them in 3 buckets. And so we'll probably take them in that order. So my first bucket, which is questions 2 and 3, is related to the scope of AI use. And so their question, let me just read those 2 questions, and then we can move forward from that. Is AGI really coming our way? And just make sure I have it here. So is AGI really coming our way? Focusing on narrow AI till now, is artificial general intelligence a near future reality or a far-fetched fantasy? And the other thing is a related question: decision making in the coming age. Can AI truly displace wisdom based on instincts and experience? So we're really talking about what is the scope of AI, what can it do, what can it not do. And related question they had was rising importance of computational skills, where more subjective disciplines like fine arts, music, and creative thinking survive the AI onslaught. So they're also saying it's almost an attack. And we'll come to some of that later in the second part of our discussion, where I talk about effects on human labor and jobs and how should we think about it. But just to begin, the big question, the big aspect the students are sort of were keen to understand, it might be interesting for a lot of people who are listening to this session, would be, well, is artificial general intelligence? And just to lay that a little bit more there, when we talk of weak AI, we are talking about anything that could be as simple as a regression to, so for example, I think, David, you mentioned some of the things in Swiggy, when you are, even deciding, who the driver should be, or, on the website, who will get in and all that. Some of those algorithms can be done through algorithms that are known, while more general intelligence AI, if we talk about, will be an AI which is so sophisticated as to have its own mind and consciousness. Some of those things that you see in the more popular movies, where we are thinking that a human, a robot has actually acquired a higher order intelligence, which you typically associate with a human being, getting to the sense of understanding what does it mean to be conscious and aware and have their own mind and have their own thinking around things. So that's a very strong AI kind of theme. as opposed to a weak AI, which might be very sufficient even for running some of the models, as Rahul was mentioning. Some of those models for training, for example, although some of them could involve a lot of deep learning and neural network based implementations, yet the kind of decisions that are being made could be some things that are more routine, in the sense buy sell decisions of that type may not be really about consciousness and general mind. So to bring the topic to the scope of AI, where do you think, or how do you think artificial general intelligence, will it evolve? Will it come to the level where we would see in the next few years, or is it really a fantasy that is seen in the movies, as students had questioned? And can it really displace the instincts and experience that we associate with human beings?
I'll make a quick comment here, just and then open up to the panels. So when I used to love this stuff as a kid, right? A lot of movies talk about, intelligence from, Terminator 2 to Terminator to Matrix to, the Avengers and all these things. When will computers, in a sense, come and take over and wipe us out, right? But the really cool thing for me was, and I'm sure, the panelists know this thing called the Turing test.
Yeah,
it's named after Alan Turing, who kind of hey, how do you define this stuff? And he had a very simple thing that basically, when you interact with the program, it's very hard for you to differentiate whether that person is a human being or not. And my view is that in many ways, AGI is here, right? The internet is connecting. I think computers. You talk about neural networks and how the computers are all connected, and the internet is a big part, in a sense, of AI. And I think using things like Siri and Alexa, my son is funny. I have two boys who are 7 and 9, and my 7-year-old, whenever he has a question, like half the time he doesn't ask me, he goes to Alexa and asks Alexa. It's like, Alexa, how tall is Mount Everest? And it pulls it up and tells him exactly. Versus me, I'd be like, I don't know, 30,000 feet. But it tells him, the exact number, which is more accurate than mine, right? So, but my point is that it's partially there.
Well, to that, I would just like to add that while it does seem to be that it's already there and a lot is being done, but in the same example, if, for example, you ask Alexa a question, but if the next question is a follow-up of the previous question.
Yeah, Abhishek, you're audible now.
Oh, sorry. So what I was saying was that on the same analogy and the same example that he gave, that while it's when we ask Alexa or Siri individual questions, they are able to answer. But when you ask a series of questions which have a relationship with the previous question that you have asked, are they able to answer? So there is still, like this panel discussion that we are conducting. Imagine doing it up with a Sophia robot that we saw, or any other Siri or Alexa. So they are there to some extent, wherein any information or anything that we ask these machines, they are able to answer. But to correlate with the previous conversation or that has been done, still I think some more research is to be done to make that happen. And that's why whenever we look at an AI application in, say, telemedicine, when we have to have a conversation between, say, a doctor and a patient being done with a machine. So very often, if the data is fed to a machine, it sometimes is not able to distinguish like which was the doctor, which was the patient. So I am sure in our lifetimes, or maybe 10 years from now, or 20 years from now, this might be possible. But there are areas in which they can function, and there are areas in which AI is yet to evolve. And I would agree with what Mr. Sarajit says and what Andrew NG always says, that anything that requires less than 5 seconds for humans to decide, those things can be done by AI. Like for manufacturing defects, if you have to find out, it will be able to do. Similarly, for Swiggy, the example that David gave, which rider to allocate, it will give. But will it be able to also check whether the person who had ordered had some complaints about the rider who was doing that? So there are ways in which it evolves. So machine learning is something that will continue with more data as we feed in, the more designs that we do. So I would say that there is a lot that AI is able to do, but there is a lot more that it can do in future, and that time is yet to come.
Thanks, Abhishek. If I may, can I add something here?
Yes, sir.
So this is one topic that I've been chasing almost for the last 10 years now. And every day I have a different view depending upon which side of the bed I got up from. So there are days when I'm with Rahul and say the future is here, it's only unevenly distributed. So patches of it. And there are days that I am even 2 steps behind where Abhishek left us saying, these stupid chatbots, they don't even understand, they hand it over to an agent and I'm dying to talk to the human. But on a serious note, obviously we are in a very serious business of a process industry, and in 110 years of Tata Steel's existence, nobody has actually touched a ton of steel and lived to tell the tale. Which means there have been certain amount of automation and mechanization which has always been in this industry because it's a continuous process industry, and you're dealing with unpredictable chemicals at 1485 to 1515 degrees centigrade. Less than that, it starts solidifying. More than that, you can have an explosion. So, the margin of error is very, very less. So to come back to this, one quick bit of the genealogy and history which Rahul was referring to. I think there have been 3 points in the last 8 years. One is when the internet, they found out that this is a cat. The machine, the algorithm found out on its own that this is a cat. The second point was when AlphaGo defeated CDOL and quite comprehensively in Go, which has got far more outcomes than chess does. The third point was where AlphaZero just learned chess on its own and destroyed Stockfish, which was my favorite. I mean, I cried for Stockfish, literally. I mean, it was a great engine and I loved playing chess at that point of time. And the latest is what GPT-3 is doing, as you might have followed the news. That's taking about 175 billion inputs rather than the 117 million that its earlier avatar GP2 was taking. So, and we at Tata Steel are realizing 2 things, and I get challenged on this. We don't believe in general AI. I mean, that's more to do with singularity and when that will come. You can say 2027, you can say 2045. You can enter into a long debate as Andrew Ng and Elon Musk does, but obviously we don't make that grade. But what I can say is that we are really at a very, very nascent stage of narrow AI. And that's measured by the fact that it takes us humongous amount of data scientists to build a model. It takes us a great amount of time to deploy the model. When we have a use case which is analogous and we try to extend the model, we realize that sometimes it's just better to have built it on scratch. But there are 2 very exciting areas that we are keen, which are both called SBM. So one is called similarity-based modeling, where you can take, in our perspective, machines, say rotary equipment, and you can model those rotary equipment as digital twins and take it to something else. But even that is challenging, but I think that's an area which will really progress. And the other is the structural break method, where you're really converting a huge number of very variable multivariate signals into a single univariate decision, which is giving you a huge amount of value. So I think those 2 SBMs are where we call broad AI. We know that general purpose AI is so laden with context. I mean, let's do, and I'll stop here to take a very simple example. All of us came into this, we did not know each other. We knew panelists, we knew that there is a objective, there is a method of participating, there is contributing. If even the best algorithm needs to learn that today, it'll take it a huge amount of time and it'll still make rookie mistakes. Now, whether in 2027 or 2030, some of the algorithms would magically stop doing that, I don't know. But unless we get there, Turing's test at scale is still something that we'll be chasing.
Right. And David, you were saying something?
I was just thinking that everybody has spoken so much, so I don't have much to add. Maybe I'll just make 2 points. First, if you just go by the purist definition of artificial general intelligence, right, which is, can a let's say machine learning algorithm pick up things which pick up anything that it wants to pick up, like a newborn baby, right? You can teach the baby Hindi or French, or how to shoot an arrow, how to play tennis, how to play chess. The baby is able to pick up any of those things. Can an ML today pick up any of those things? Absolutely not. Like what Sarajit was saying, it's rumored by 2030 we'll probably be able to have something like that. and science fiction, people will tell you all you need to do is teach an AI to build a better AI. That's all you need to do, and if it's successful, then you're done for. Okay.
And Facebook has some of that.
From that perspective, right? Can a can a machine learning algorithm that picks up French also play chess? Absolutely not. Okay. The example that Sarajit gave is AlphaGo, the computer that played Go. I was actually able to pick up chess, but by itself. But can it pick up another language by itself? We're not very sure. But researchers say that maybe by 2030 plus, we'll have some form of artificial general intelligence. That's one thing. The second thing is I want to say is, despite all of that, right? There is an amount of wherever things need judgment, wherever you need care, compassion, wherever you need ethics. Okay, these are things that AI today is not able to do. Okay, plus at a narrow level, right? Many times the AI we have today is actually much better than the humans. Okay, you can make a simple if-then statement and design a game to play tic-tac-toe. Okay, simple if-then statements. It'll be the best one in the world just by how you made it. It might be a very simple AI, but it's probably the best, and it will pass a Turing test for that specific use case. Do you think you're playing against a human? Maybe it will. Okay. So the point I want to make there is it's not really about Turing test or not, or the benefit or damage of that particular artificial general intelligence. There are very sophisticated, highly effective, narrow AI available today. Okay, so any good and bad that the world can get from the AGI and the Terminator world is already available today. In many of these narrow AI, they're really smart. Okay, so what I just want to encourage people to think about is, don't wait for that day to come when we have AGI available. Many of the good things that you can get from AI and the bad things that you can get from AI are already there today. Okay, and I would encourage all of us to start that discussion of when not if AI gets better or when AI gets better. AI is better than humans in many ways today. Now, how do we build that world when AI is better than humans? So that's something that I want to encourage people to think about.
David, I think you picked a very interesting, point and a very good way to look at it. And indeed, some of the things that I think everybody has talked about. AI is better than humans in many things. And going back to the Turing test was actually about whether you can go into a room, chat with two, sort of on a console, and not find out who the person on the other side of the wall is. And it goes to the extent that again, so philosophically or more thoughtfully, the example I gave earlier, it even said that if a very complex calculation is given to that particular bot, it should reply wrong if it is to reply very quickly. And the idea is that it should fake that it is human because human cannot do it. And the reason I mention that is that there is really a question about what do we want AI to do? Do we want it to be smarter than humans in some spheres? And we don't want it. So if it is to run or operate an aeroplane for that matter, we know that those systems can get very complicated and sometimes beyond human thing. If the data is large to, let's say, assess how much is the cloud and pressure and everything else in the environment and where should the best route be. And if you have to make that decision very quickly, a system which is AI driven might be better. And that's why a lot of those planes fly on autopilot these days, or with the large support of autopilot systems, etc. And so in many spheres, AI might be better. And the question is, well, where exactly do we want AI and how? And maybe, I think, David, you've kind of taken us towards that direction as well in your last comments. In some domains, AI is better and will be better than humans, and it should be. But then I think the question, and it leads us to the next one, which is where I think a lot of people are sort of concerned. What is it that AI can do? Can it take over subjective tasks? Can it take over tasks that require experience? And I think one of the exact question was, can can AI be taught more subjective disciplines like fine arts, music, and creative thinking, etc. And I think there is a general consensus or a concern, if you may, amongst a lot of people who see AI as a competitor in that space and not really as a complement or as somebody who would support us, but something that would destroy the good things that human have. So, any thoughts on what is the scope
So
of
I'll just
subjective?
So I'll just make another 2 points there. First is which field is it good to be better in versus which field it's not good to be better in. That's not a question we should be asking because that's not a choice we have. Okay, irrespective of what field it is, AI will slowly get better over time. Some fields it might be better than humans. Some fields it might not be better than humans. But that progress is not a choice we have. It will just get better over time. Okay, so that's something we have to accept and then live with it. Okay, the second point I want to make is so back to I'm just forgetting the second point. Okay, I'll come back to this. Okay, why don't I skip for a minute? Okay.
Other thoughts on that?
I would just like to say is that again, picking from what David said, is that the key things with regard to whenever we have to take a call on what AI should do and what AI should not do will require something like a code for ethical AI. Like very often machine learning algorithms, if we use it just in the way it is, like plain data science giving us modeling, giving us predictions with regard to that, many of the biases which have existed for long in our society, whether it's race related or gender related or caste related in India's case, that may get amplified with the AI based model if we do not bring in the learnings that we have over the so many years and try to ensure that the AI based tool should not accentuate the wrongs that we see in our society. So that's where the code for ethical AI, that's where the thought for responsible AI comes in. And then the other thing would be like what to do and what not to do. If we look at the kind of AI which is being used by many of the social media platforms today, and the kind of things that they do, of course, their business is targeting ads and increasing the revenues. But is it ethical for them to listen to our conversations and then throw ads, which all of us are experiencing? We are reading about it. So when we sign up for a service, for example, on Instagram or Facebook, we have not signed it for them to listen to us when we are not using the app. But when we actually use it, they are using AI tools in capturing any conversation that is happening and then targeting ads on that. So that is something that needs to be regulated. That's the thing. That's something we need to think over. Even if AI can do something, should it be doing that? And
so Abhishek, I want to stop you there because I have a last section on this. I know this will go long if we get into this track, and it is important. So my last set of questions are on responsible use and governance of AI. So I'm going to stop that conversation for now. But what I really wanted to say is that in terms of technical potentiality, does it have the ability to simulate? And I think so. The question did say whether finer arts and subjective experiences and music and other things can be done. Although having said that, I would also note that it has already been done. Not just it can be done, but it has already been done. ABB, I think, did a music orchestra in one of the, and you can look up, it's on YouTube video. I've shown it to students many times in the class, where they had a robot which could actually conduct the whole orchestra. And so some of those things which we would originally associate with finer things such as music or more softer or subjective faculties of human mind, not so quantitative technical, perceived to be not quantitative technical, actually have been lent or championed through technical and quantitative means. So to some extent that territory has been done, but I think what students were really keen to understand and what might be good to hear is, where do we think there is a boundary, or is there a boundary for what AI cannot do? And so that will later then bring us to the discussion on what we should not allow it to do, right? So we'll come to that, what it should not allow or what it should be allowed to do, but is there something that it cannot do? Let me put the question there.
Yeah, I'd go with Sarajit's 4 C's. Sarajit, why don't you go ahead with that?
No, go ahead, David. I'll listen in.
No, I was just going to ask you to say that because your 4 C's were very good.
Yeah, so just to repeat that, I think, wherever you need care, which is human feelings and human consciousness to come in, which AI by definition today is devoid of, wherever you need critical thinking, which means that thinking beyond what data sets already have there. So, ultimately AI is only doing two things. It's either doing classification or prediction, or both of them simultaneously. So when you're having to have critical thinking, it means you come up with the right question against a problem that does not exist, rather than the right answer for a problem that you've been asked to solve, which is two very, very fundamentally different constructs. And of course, then you need curiosity, which is the ability to continuously generate those questions. AI is great in finding an answer, but AI is not that great yet in asking the questions that should be asked. And those questions come from deep context, which multidimensionally, our eyes, which ingest 2 Gbps of data per second, and hitting all our five senses and knowing all our experiences at the same time, are much able to do. And last but not the least, it's collaboration. I mean, how do two algorithms collaborate with each other? Having said that, the generative adversarial networks are looking at doing that by playing with each other. You can have 6 groups playing, 9 groups playing. You can introduce certain biases in those groups. But, we are able to do all these 4 things simultaneously. So wherever these things are required in some measure or the other, I don't think AI is the best solution in some time to come.
What I'd like to propose, nevertheless, is this concept called augmented intelligence. Okay, as Rahul was when he was a kid, when I was a kid, Deep Blue beat Gary Kasparov, and that was a big moment in history. If you see now, you'll not hear of those grandmasters getting beaten by computers. Okay, the reason is that each grandmaster has their own supercomputer. So if you look at the quality of chess today, because the grandmaster has that computer with them, right? They are actually better than what they used to be earlier. So now when two humans are competing, it's humans plus their computer versus the other human with their computer. Okay, the quality of chess and the quality of the human being itself has become better because of the presence of this AI. And that's something we need to think about, the concept of augmented intelligence. For example, I would never let AI make a judgment in a court case, for example, right? But can the judge become smarter because of some information or insights that the AI can give? Absolutely. So that is a case that I'd like to propose, the case of augmented AI, where even in places where AI is not very good, can we have the augmentation coming through the AI and let the human being get the right information in the right format to be able to make the decision. So that, I think, is actually doable, even in places where we definitely don't want to let AI enter.
So David, that will be very interesting, but also very, so that's not as simple as that as it is. There is a lot of e-discovery algorithms that are actually being used by the law firms in US, wherein they'll put an AI-based bot to do all the analysis on a particular judge, on the type of case that is there, and every judgment he has given is related to that, to find out which arguments are most appealing. They don't need a $175,000 or $200,000 lawyer working for 3 months. It's one bot working overnight, which will do all the analysis to come up the best algorithm or the best reasons or the best, the line of reasoning that should be pursued to win the case against this specific judge on this specific lawsuit or this specific case. And so the point is, augmentation can be done by everyone. It can be with the judge, it can be with the lawyer, it can be everyone, right? So it's not, so again, we're going to come back to this question of managing it, because I know that, I think that's the most complex one. It's not going to be as simple, because, if AI is open and free for everyone, then who gets it and how does he or she use it is going to be a big topic. Sarajit, you were saying something.
Yeah, I don't know. I want to come in and support, kind of built on what David was saying on that point. So there, I think, those chess players who work with the computers are called centaurs, and there's a lot of, one can read that on the net. There's a lot of very exciting stuff, which clearly establishes that it is not human or AI, but it is the human plus AI, which is what he's referring to as augmented intelligence. And it takes back to us to when we started this journey. So when we started this journey and we said that here is an aid, the moment you bring in AI in a context, the humans get scared, and then your AI journey in an organizational context or the societal context can be set back. Like, there were people 30 years ago who were speaking up against computers, and today you can't, imagine. And Abhishek, I'm sure, can tell us tales about how difficult it was for particularly banking and some of the bureaucracy to accept computers because they thought it will take their jobs away. And one of the things that we came up with is we came up with a principle called cold, warm, and hot trials to really take this AI to the shop floor. And let me just, very shortly explain this to you. We came up with the data and we told the operator that, look, you don't need to use this AI. It's like your baby. Just see what it says and take the decision that you do. Listen to it if you want to. And we will see that if you're listening to it versus you listen to your own judgment versus a hybrid of it, how you would have done. And when the operator got a little bit more comfortable, we went to warm trial, which is we said, now the AI is the primary and it'll take the decision, but you have the ability to override the decision and see how you're performing. And this is how you performed earlier against your goal, and this is how you did it now. And then if that succeeded, that's where we completely went into, hot trials, which is we said, AI is now primary, it runs on, you're like that X-ray in the environment, you stop it, but typically you let it run. And, to Rahul's point, it was all about, it's a 3-step journey. First, you perform as good as the average or the total of the human being. Then you perform as good, learn from the best human beings. And then you have to beat the best human beings. Now, wherever you can do that, you go to AI. Important point is in all the 4 C's and judgment, even AI asking the right questions and matching an average judge is way, way, way off it. So I think it's something that we should keep in the back of our minds. Thank you.
Yeah, in fact, what Sarajit says makes a lot of sense, because ultimately it's like a journey of automation. Like what you start doing, so you're doing manually, you brought in computers, it helped you become more efficient. And once you do that, you have more data, and now you have higher powered computers. And the moment you have data and you have more higher powered computers, you can run those analytics on that data and come to better conclusion. So that's a natural course of evaluation which has been happening for a long time, and this is going to happen in every domain. So whether it's fine arts, whether it's music, we will have AI based tools will come up with something better. But then, as has happened with chess players who are using computers and their own ingenuity, there will be musicians who will be coming up with better stuff. You will be able to use better computers. So it will be a mix of the two. It's not that the human ingenuity will be totally lost and we'll lose to the machines forever. It will be something that things will get better and better. And ultimately, we will be going to a higher level of evolution probably.
Yeah, I'll just make a quick comment here. So I think without a doubt, that creative genius will be trumped by, let's say, AI in the future. I think I like applying it in our own lives. You mentioned, autopilot. One reason why I think Tesla has a very large market capitalization is people realize that, it's not really just a car company. It is really almost an AI company. And if you go look at Uber versus Tesla, the market capitalizations, let's say 3-4 years ago, they're roughly the same. They're both, let's say, $40-50 billion, and now Tesla's broken through the roof. I don't think it's because they're in a old industry, manufacturing car industry. I think it's because they realize Tesla's getting better and better at building this stuff. Not the hardware, their software is getting better, right? And so we use, if you think about it, every one of us uses AI every day. If you drive a car, the navigation system tells you how to get somewhere, and it's better than because it has the wisdom of the crowd. It takes traffic data patterns. It's better than the best New York City cab driver 20 years ago. So this ingenuity that's being built in because the wisdom of the crowd gets into it. So it's like this creative genius will adapt into all systems, I believe, in the future.
I think those are very good points. Those are all very good points that have been. So let me give a little bit context to where I think the concern is, and it's not new. Even in the case of computers, like has been discussed. This concern was always there, not just in India, also in US. Economists earlier countered some of those things by saying, this is a Luddite argument. It was a famous term in economics. And the idea is that, some of those famous, economists would say that if you really want to create employment and if you really want to worry about jobs, why don't you give people spoons to dig the land? And why do you need extensive machinery? You'll create more jobs. It'll take longer. So the idea is not to be inefficient. The idea is to use the most efficient means. Having said that, some of those economists now are concerned how to organize it, because it seems there is vast displacement of labor. And so the idea is not that it can stop. In fact, even when ATM machines came, there was a lot of concern that it will take human jobs away. And all we have seen is the banking industry has actually flourished much more, because you could focus on other types of needs that people had from the banking industry. And so the idea is human evolution, I think Abhishek was mentioning, will happen as more and more individuals free up their time to focus on things that are of higher order. The challenge is how and where do we focus those energies? And so it's not, the AI will come. Technically, it will be stronger. It is stronger in many ways. And the question then, I think, this is probably a good point to move, where the next question they're saying is, what is the quantity and quality of people we need for the workforce of the future, as more and more mundane tasks or more and more routine tasks are offloaded to AI? And I would just add to this question a little bit. This was the original question, but a lot of the domains, a lot of industries are changing in terms of what the workforce is expected to do. Even in the sort of industry for creating designs, people you have been using. This was CTO of Autodesk once mentioned that they are creating hundreds of designs for when it would take one design would take 100 of hours to create, or many hours to create. An AI-based system can create an automatic design and offer recommendations to their clients. They can pick what design they like, not just wait for a designer to take hours to make a design for a house or anything that they want built. Now, when AI does it very, very quickly, what does the designer become? The designer might become the curator of designs, or the designer might be the one who's more into human-based assessments or something, right? So some of those things, when AI takes over some of the competencies that traditionally humans had to possess, what are the competencies that humans would need to possess? And Sarajit, you might have given some answers to that by saying things that require compassion and all that. But then are we all saying that humans would just be good, or humans need to be trained to be good at being compassionate? Is that the only thing that we need, or are we? So what is that competencies of the future? And some of those questions, I've heard a lot of people who are worried about teaching their kids. A lot of them have talked to me and said, we've decided to go to Montessori schools and things of that nature, which may not require traditional education, because 25 years down the line, 30 years down the line, when my kid enters into the workforce, I don't think any of these things would be required, right? So the question of what is it that the workforce would need to do, especially if you're thinking long term. Vishy, you have a point? Or
So, if I may, I think there was a interview I gave, I think 3 years ago. I said my day job is to digitalize the world, and my night job is to worry what if I succeed. And I mean, that was not the quote, but you know how journalism works. I was quoted as saying that. That was said in a different context inside. But I think that whoever was the journalist who called that out has really called me out, in the sense that, so let's take numbers first. McKinsey says that there is 94 million jobs that AI will create and 85 million jobs that AI will destroy. Sure. I can say for a fact that those 85 million plus jobs will definitely disappear. Whether those 94 million jobs really gets created is what all of us together with you as a professor teaching the people the right things, Abhishek as administrator setting the right context, and David, Rahul and myself being able to really create jobs and drive our organizations in that direction, will have to deliver. I'm just saying that we are a cosmic, microcosmic representation of a larger macrocosm. And I don't think currently any of us are thinking about that. And that's really the problem. We may be thinking about it on a Sunday afternoon, but when we go back to our day jobs, David is ensuring, how do I compete with Zomato? I'm ensuring, how do I stave off the China challenge? You are thinking, how does the next academic calendar go, and so on and so forth. So that's a big problem, okay? Which is that it is somebody else's problem, but it's right onto us. And there is an unemployment Armageddon coming. Only two options. We either go the UBI route, that all of us work very hard, give our money, and otherwise the social cost is something we don't even want to grapple with. The other is that overall, if you want to have a more technical and a more micro thing that, I've had students come back to me and say, Sarajit, that's all fantastic, but what do I do? So what do you need to do, if at all anything, and I don't know, is to think that the basic question is, what is the future of work? The future of work is three things. The future of the work. So 50% of the jobs that are going to come up are not going to be invented today in the next 5 years. I can't predict what they are, but I'm sure data scientists and data engineers and data architects and operations translators and those guys who are better at the 4Cs are definitely going to do a good job. So take whatever training is needed. It's about, as far as the future of the worker is concerned, Neil Harbison is a reality. He's the world's first Android, but not the last. So you will have three kinds of workers: AI, androids, and humans. And each should do, an organization will win if it gets them to do what it does. And as far as the future of work is concerned, it's already on. I mean, it's going to be distributed, collaborative, remote, anytime, anywhere, and a mix of offices and not. So how you thrive in that kind of future of work is the question we should be asking. And it's not just related to AI, it's related to cloud, it's related to automation, it's related to society, it's related to trade regulations and economy as a whole, because a robot does not consume everything. So whenever a robot is replacing a human, it's not one job lost. It is the 3.5 jobs that one job supports as aggregate demand, which gets lost.
Just continue on that thought, right? I was just thinking, what happened to people when cars came out? Okay. So I can actually see three kinds of transformations to human beings when cars came out. Okay. First is people had to learn to drive the car or use the car. So I'm just like AI, right? You can go and plow into a bunch of pedestrians and cause a lot of damage. And mostly cars have been safe for us. So how do you safely drive the car? So that's one big change that has happened. Next big change is even bigger than the first one, which is this whole ecosystem of the things that you need to actually support the driving of the car. For example, you need to create roads. You need to have petrol stations. You need to have people who are mechanics who can repair the car, things like that. That whole ecosystem of people who actually maintain the cars, or the ecosystem required for the cars to run properly. That's the second big change which has happened. Third big change is actually a whole lifestyle change. So for example, before cars, maybe you could travel on foot 5-10 kilometers in a day. Today, with a car, you can maybe do 50, 100, 200 kilometers in a day. And what that does is you can choose a workplace which is a little bit far away. You can actually have people accumulate in cities where there's a crowd of people and crowd of jobs available and things. So there's a bigger lifestyle change. So if I apply those same things to AI world, right? The same three things. First would be people who use the AI. Okay, so people have to learn how to use it in a way that is beneficial to humankind and beneficial to whatever business they're serving at the same time. So that's the first kind of jobs that you'll come up, which is these are the the business end users of AI. Second is this whole ecosystem of people who are fueling, allowing the thing to run. So all the way from people who are running the cloud platforms where we build it, people who are writing the libraries which we use, plus the data scientists who are actually building the cars themselves, right? That's the next set of jobs that will be there. So the first and second, the users and the maintainers or the enablers, they will actually, I feel, be a smaller set of jobs that will come up. The bigger set is actually not a change of jobs per se, but a transformation in the way we live our life, just like the car did to us, right? We will see a transformation of the things that we do, maybe not good or bad per se, but just different, okay? And that's the more of the large scale thing that the rest of the people who are not involved in making or maintaining AI will have to be used to. Like when our world changes because of AI, so how can we subtly change what we are doing? Like if you are making horses or if you're breeding horses when the cars came out, you are done for. But there were 100, maybe 1,000 other professions which have slightly altered what they do, and now they're still. The banker is a banker irrespective of the car, right? So something, a slight change of the way you do your business, right? That might actually lead this to a win-win situation where we have a transformation in our life, but it might actually end up a little bit better than what the previous transformation was. Okay.
Yeah, in fact, echo those thoughts. And while the numbers which Sarajit quoted from McKinsey might be valid, but what I feel is that the number of jobs that can be created with the AI and with data science, well, what happens is that the value of services goes up. The number of services which are possible today with the use of technology and the right use of AI will multiply many-fold. And the opportunity that will be there worldwide, and especially India as one of the top providers of tech workforce in the world, if we can position ourselves as the AI garage for the world, then we can build solutions at population scale, and that can be deployed world over. So that would, to my mind, the opportunity that we have is to ensure that more and more people from India are skilled in being able to take those jobs of data scientists and data analysts that will come up. And how do we do that becomes a very important part of our strategy. Like, can we think of all our triple ITs focusing only on this kind of thing instead of dividing itself into several domains and all. So once the opportunity is there, and if we are able to provide the workforce, then it will lead to a lot of value. And the similar thing that we are seeing, apart from use of AI, is this whole in the post-pandemic world, as more and more companies are working from home, and we are seeing that works which need not require a person to be in office, and especially in government also, like in my organization, wherein we do a lot of information coding and information development and dissemination, videos, graphics. For the last 6 months, my entire team is working from home. And not only home, what I'm observing is that some of them working from very remote villages. And with the expansion of connectivity, they are like somebody is in a village in Gorakhpur, somebody is a village in Andhra Pradesh somewhere, somebody is in Aurangabad. So if the jobs get diversified and the people start contributing to the tech world by working remotely, then what will happen is that this will ensure availability of disposable incomes in these smaller towns and villages. And if more and more industries adopt this work from home practice, even after the pandemic, then and if disposable incomes are available in the villages and the rural areas, the smaller towns, then that will lead to growth of businesses around those townships, and that will create further jobs. So that's an unintended maybe benefit that may accrue to us after the pandemic. So if as and when more people go off site and start working, so that's a huge opportunity lying there. It's up to us, like how do we channelize them, how do we make them as a part of, in government especially, it's a very difficult process to ensure that I will allow my guys to come, and even if they're not attending office in the physical sense, still I will mark them present. So we have adopted, you just to convince our finance and other fellows that if there's a screenshot of a Zoom meeting or a Teams meeting, that's attendance. And therein I was telling my team, can we build an AI, even if I don't have a screenshot, if there are a couple of mails exchanged in the morning, that means attendance is marked. So the guy is working, the outcome should be there, and then it should happen. So it requires a attitudinal shift, especially in the government, and I'm sure in many of the bigger private companies also. And once that happens, the gains that can come from this technological progress that is made in the field of AI, and very soon, if we can talk of blockchain or IoT and other stuff that's going to come, it will be immense. It's the right time for us to position ourselves to be the back office for the world for providing these solutions. And if we are doing that, I think we will be in a much better position, and most people who have menial jobs right now will move up the value chain, and that will add to the value that we can create as a nation.
Yeah, let me, sorry, Rahul.
No, ditto, because I know there's lots of stuff going on. So I think what other panelists said was great. So.
Yeah, I just want to make one comment. There's been a lot of research and I've been part of some of that, in my academic career. One of the findings that has kind of stayed with me, and it's pretty unique, is that you cannot use a tools view of technology. And by a tools view, we mean something that was created by an engineer, intended to serve a certain purpose, and it actually did that way. Whenever a technology goes out into the world, it gets embedded into a context, and good organizations, good managers are able to leverage it through complementary and complementing um, initiatives, governance mechanisms, practices, and ideas that help bring the technology to its good outcome, or whatever is a good outcome perceived or by the user, not so much by the designer. And so I think that perspective, I'll just kind of give on this idea of having technology, like Abhishek was saying, if you have AI, and David mentioned about cars, both seem to be doing the same job. When cars came in, suburbs came up in US because people could travel, like you were saying, David, earlier. That happened. And so with AI, if you can get it into the rural areas where we in fact might have deficiency in roads and infrastructure and many other things that might otherwise inhibit the ability of individuals to work from distant places, if we can use the telecommunication infrastructure and the prowess of AI to do monitoring, if you may, Abhishek, if those are concerns, or do a formal set of practices and governance mechanisms which can enable working from remote areas, let's say, not displacing people from their habitats and so on, and yet giving them the comfort or their ability to fulfill their desire to work and achieve things they would like to do. One more quick comment on Sarajit, and then I'll move to the last point and maybe take a couple of questions after that. Universal income, I think, Sarajit, you mentioned it briefly and we didn't talk much about it, but that is some topic that I just wanted to hear your thoughts on in terms of, there have been referendums in some of the European countries and people have voted against having universal income, which means people inherently have a desire to get paid for the work they do and not just get paid. But having said that, there have been other arguments in US from some presidential candidates who have said that, well, why do we have a person start from zero? Why don't we start them from $1,000 or something, which is the base income? They would have all of that. Everybody in the society starts at $1,000, and you can fight over and above that. You can work hard to make more money beyond that. So any thoughts on this universal income idea, which a lot of people in Silicon Valley and other places have mooted to say that that's something that we should do and let people just hang out and do whatever, and we'll do the work with AI.
Yeah, I was going to mention, so two parts on the connection. Thomas Piketty's book on capital and socioeconomic stuff. Without a doubt, I think AI, blockchain, tech is gonna flatten that. And then what I think will happen is, because we are humans and we do have governance, is I believe there'll eventually be a tax on. Yeah, it is. If my income can get taxed, why can't an artificial intelligence income get taxed? It will use that tax to basically pay for everything else, right?
Yeah, and I absolutely support Rahul on that, and because that takes care of the problem of aggregate demand. And I think taking the point that David and Abhijit were making, Abhishek were making about the, there are three issues to that. One is when the automobile came in and destroyed, the horse carriages, the jobs that were created by automobiles were much dumber than what the Wright brothers or anybody else or say Ford had to do, which means that the jobs, when dumber jobs were created, dearer jobs were created, and a lot more jobs were created because the construction industry which builds the road, the steel industry that built for that construction industry, the cement industry that was created, the entire amount of evacuation industry that was created, the amount of automobiles that were created to build the road, which is all the excavators and everything else, far more compensated than over a factor more than the automobiles themselves. The suburbs that was created even had greater intensity, and you had to mine cement and steel and everything else. So the entire mining industry got created. The mining industry had to be supported, so you got more computer industries and other automation industries that got created. So unless that same multiplier happens, and I don't have a line of sight to it, those 95 million jobs are not going to come, or those, as it is. So I think that's a very important point. And it's not sequential. I mean, the jobs that are getting displaced today are much more dumber than the jobs which are getting created. And that's the reverse of what happened in the last industrial revolutions. Because the last industrial revolution really was about making geography history by people traveling across. This is really making history geography by people not having to travel across. So there is a keen difference between the two. And hence, I think taxing AI and creating a universal basic income are the two, not the best, not the most efficient, but the two intermediate solutions that we should seriously consider.
Well, all that I can say is that maybe people would not be traveling, but data would be. And if we go ahead with the kind of data that is being created with various kind of operations, and if data business units are created, and if data with those who have is shared with those who need, it can have that multiplier effect that you are talking about. Like for example, today maybe telcos or maybe a company like Google has a lot of mobility data. If that data is required, public entities in the non-personal data recommendations that the government has come up with, they talks about creating data business units. And if this data is shared by the telcos and a company like Google maybe with say city planners, and they have to decide on which kind of new transportation routes to make up and what kind of things to bring in, so it can create a lot of value there. And similarly, between private entities, somebody trying to build up a new solution with the data which is available with somebody else who has been in the business for a longer time, if there is a mechanism, a framework for sharing that data with new businesses, then there will be entrepreneurs and there will be people who would write code and who would build up solutions which might create value about which we would not have thought of also. So I would feel that with the growth coming in, there would be a lot more jobs that will be created and lot more value that will be created about things which are not even thought of. So we must not like there was a time when nobody thought of that one could travel like one traveled in an aircraft. So similarly, we would have will be able to interact with people through voice across continents in various time zones. So there will the kind of explosion that will lead to will create a lot of jobs for data scientists, and we should be looking into enabling that and thinking in what ways we can make that a reality.
Any last comments or thoughts? I have a few questions I want to take, but maybe we can think of that, and we will end after we answer these questions.
The really cool question is on the universal basic income. Is it going to be decided on a global scale, or is it going to be decided by by sovereign states, right? So you're thinking that it might only come. Everyone's always saying it's only government, but heck, Apple might eventually give basic income to people who use iOS, and Google will give income to people who use Android. I don't think it goes only by sovereigns. It'll evolve into new organizations.
That is
the Bitcoin network.
That is
the Bitcoin network will give you Bitcoin. There could be new things in a sense that pay you.
Yeah, if you can overcome even the global or the geographic national boundaries to think about humanity as one, and maybe that's a good place to end up in. If that is something AI can do, maybe that itself is a good outcome to get to. But yeah, okay. So let me then take a few questions that people have, and we'll wind up after that. One of the questions that people have said is, I think Shivam, and he has mentioned basically a lot of things, but his idea is that are we doing narrow applications of AI, something like a low-hanging fruit, calling it AI, where it is simple automations, and we are really not tapping into the real potential of AI, and actually diluting its significance for what AI can mean and be able to do by tapping into the low-hanging fruit and doing very simple automations through it.
In fact,
I think that's. I think that any technology, that's what happens. At the very beginning, people do step over the easy solutions, but then as they conquer them, it'll get better and better, right?
Yeah, in fact, in a way it's right, but it's not that you can classify what is AI and what is not AI. There can be very, very complex uses of AI, and there can be very simple uses of AI. So yes, it may be called as a low-hanging fruit, but anything that adds value in whatever we are doing, or makes us do something which is better, even if it is very simple or it's regarded as a low-hanging fruit, why not do it? But that doesn't mean that we limit ourselves to that only, and we do not try to solve bigger societal problems by better use of AI. So today we are doing basic diagnosis of diseases and all, like image processing, retinopathy and all, but there are researchers who are working on diagnosis jaundice, diagnosis tuberculosis with the sound, the way you cough on it. So there will be greater use of AI as we go ahead. So using the low-hanging fruits or trying the simple solutions does not mean that researchers or anyone else would not attempt the bigger ones.
and that's normal, right? So the industry would get to things that have been tested and that work because that's what's profitable right now. A lot of other things which might be in development might mature in the next few years and become commercially viable, and so those would probably be seen in the industry as well. I'll take one last question, which is really about there are two people who have asked similar questions. I'm going to combine them. It's basically about digital economy versus real economy. Is it an arena of possibilities or a multicolored mask? I'm not sure what the question writer intended by a multicolored mask here, but the idea is that there is a digital economy versus real economy. And then another question saying that physical supply chains, can these be augmented via AI? And we have excellent software products supporting supply chains. How will AI further make supply chains more important? And this question, I think, is important from Indian context more than anything else, because of the wide difference sometimes you see in the quote unquote real versus digital economy, in terms of that, or even supply chain, where some places are so inaccessible and so hard to get to and others not. So if you may, in whatever facets of it, even if you want to broaden it, share your thoughts on how these two economies or how these two sets of people are going to be influenced, or will there be, one of the areas of research that I have pursued is digital divide. Are we going to see a greater digital divide as a result of it, or are we going to decrease the divide in some manner?
So it's harder to scale. I think two things. It's harder to scale atoms and molecules than it is to scale bits and bytes, which fundamentally means that and David was here and is here, and you have to deliver stuff, and you have to deliver stuff efficiently, and you have to deliver stuff also effectively. And that is something that technology brings. But you're not, fine, you could 3D print it, but that's a while away. The shoe has to still come to your house. So everything in a way is a bridgetal or phygital or has that implication. Now the essence is, where does the value go? Does value go to the guy who is writing the algorithm? Does value go to the logistics service provider? Or does value go to the goods manufacturer? Or where is the value? Or does it go to the government in terms of the taxation? And how fair is that process? So I think the fact that the top 7 companies in the world are platform companies which are running what is called data-rich markets, and a disproportionate amount of the value is going to them. And people who work them or support with them are the second guys, like the TCS and IBMs and everybody else in the world. And then everybody else's number comes. Means that there is a disproportionate amount of value moving to the data economy. And the value that you have from collecting the data and doing something with it is far more than the value you have in owning the asset and running the asset. And if that continues, then you would have digital haves and have-nots, because as we already discussed, bulk of the jobs were in those guys who were working in those assets. And if they have a lesser, and if those guys controlling it have a lesser and lesser amount, then they have a lesser and lesser amount to share with the guys who are working with them. And it creates a digital divide straight away.
Yeah, I would just like to just add that when we talk of digital economies and the real economy, the way they are intertwined, it's very difficult to segment them in clear buckets. This is digital and this is not. Like, there is hardly any segment of real economy or physical economy which doesn't have a digital component to it. Like, for example, when we are building the $1 trillion digital roadmap for India, to how do we measure, like, what proportion of a business is coming from digital and what proportion of it is coming from physical world? So that becomes a challenge. So it's not that something is purely digital or something is purely physical. They are interlinked and each one adds value to the other. As far as digital divide is concerned, yes, it's a reality. It's something that we are facing. The more and more we go digital, and especially when the government goes digital, and when we, like, for example, when we promote e-learning, the moment we do e-learning and the schools are shut and online learning is going on, it's very obvious that those who have access to digital devices and reliable internet connection, they are able to get the lessons. But what about those who do not have a device? And there are millions of Indians, kids who do not have. And even if they have, do they have a reliable connectivity? So digital divide is something that we need to address. It should not happen that whatever investment we make in the digital field benefits a small segment of people. How we do it? Yes, we are thinking of producing low-cost tablets, providing connectivity, just like electricity has been provided to every village. Fiber is being taken to every village in order to ensure the robust connectivity is there. Digital health mission is going to transform, make electronic health record for all of us. But how do we ensure that those who do not have access to technology or do not have the ability to access, they are not left behind? So digital divide is something that we will have to address. It's not yet done, but yes, it's something that is on the top of the agenda.
Just from a perspective of working at a company which is doing logistics, right? Swiggy is pretty much a hyper-local logistics company. We move physical things from place to place. I would say it is literally impossible to move stuff from place to place without a digital input or an AI input to it. It's literally impossible. And if I take what Swiggy is doing to other logistics companies, right, I would actually say that a physical supply chain, which is pure physical, doesn't exist. It has to have a digital component to it. And whoever is part of that supply chain is getting affected by it. Okay. The good thing about this is you could have the best AI data scientists in India working out of a single central place. And the moment that engineer presses a button, right, that best AI is available to everybody across the country because it's a digital thing. And that's the potential of the benefit of AI that we have, that you press a button and the entire supply chain across the whole country actually gets that little bit 0.1% better. And over time, that is a huge impact to everybody who's affected by that supply chain. Okay. Now, back to what Abhishek was saying, right? Not everybody is affected by that supply chain. The more we digitize the people across the country, across the world, right? Then they will be affected by the supply chain. So I would say there is a digital divide, but the once we bridge the digital divide, the potential of the benefits accruing to everybody is actually very high because you press a button and everybody gets the benefit of it. So our focus should actually be on bridging the digital divide, and then the benefits of the digital enhancement to the supply chain actually gets to everybody. I don't think there is a pure digital economy or a pure digital pure non-digital economy or a pure physical supply chain. They're all digital at this point of time. Our job actually, I would say, is to make sure that the benefit reaches everybody through bridging the digital divides.
Set of thoughts, and I'm being told that our conversations are great, but we are out of time. And very nice to have you guys here. Thanks for coming to IMA this time virtually. We'll hope you'll come sometime physically as well. I mentioned to some of you earlier, I've just joined IMA, and one of the things we are doing here is starting a Center for Responsible or Digital Transformation with a sharp focus on responsible. So be a part of it. The kind of things we've talked about. Sarajit, you mentioned, we do think and work trying to address that. So we're going into that direction where we really leverage digital technologies for a better future for India and the world. And so hopefully you all will be part of that initiative and help support us with whatever ways we can. Thanks again for taking the time today. Really appreciate, and thank you for helping our students learn. I'm sure our students can reach you if they have questions or comments, and just keep this conversation on and going for a while. Thank you, everyone. Special thanks, Vishy, for coordinating and having me here. Thank you. And
thanks everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Happy Dussehra to everyone and theirs. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Lavlesh, I see you've joined. Are you there? He is not able to unmute.
Hi there. Can you hear me now?
Yes. Hi, good evening.
Good evening.
Let's just give it another minute and we can start.
Sure. Sure.
All right, let's get started. Good
There's some
evening,
echo.
Sorry?
There is a little bit of echo on the line. I'm not sure if others are hearing it.
Can someone please confirm if they hear an echo? All right, is it better now?
Yeah.
Great, let's get started. So, good evening, everyone. I welcome you all to the last and final session by Connections under the umbrella of the Red Brick Summit 2020. The theme for today's session is product management, identity, privacy, and finance. Today, we have with us Mr. Lavlesh Chabra, Managing Director in Product Management at Goldman & Sachs. Lavlesh is a PGPX alum from the batch of 2008 and 9. He's recently joined Goldman & Sachs and is leading the platformization of GS's identity and access management suite of products. Prior to joining Goldman & Sachs, Lavlesh worked at Verizon Media and was responsible for multiple consumer-facing platforms, including identity, privacy, payments, and mobiles. In, in his 20 plus years of career, Lavlesh has held a multitude of roles within the technology space and has worked for large successful enterprises like IBM, Oracle, Pfizer, General Electronics, Yahoo, and Verizon. Lavlesh is currently based out of the San Francisco Bay Area in California. In his free time, he spends time building Legos and cooking experimental dishes. So without much further ado, I present to you Mr. Lavlesh Chabra.
Hey, thank you, Nitika, for that. Hi, all. I'm really excited to be back and chatting with the PGPX crowd. In another year, I would have loved to come on campus and be part of this conversation. And this is probably the best we could do, given that it's not another year, it's 2020, right? Everything that can go wrong has largely gone wrong this year. So let's try and make the best of this hour or so that we have. I'll, just in the interest of sort of getting to know each other, I will spend a couple of minutes talking about my journey post PGPX. We can kind of leave the pre PGPX for another session when it's a bit more in person, casual, that kind of chat. But I graduated, like Nitika said, in 2009, right? And my entire batch saw a recession up close like nobody else did, right? When we got to the campus, the market was kind of reasonably stable. And when we started studying, I want to say maybe week 5 or week 6, Lehman Brothers went down, right? And then onwards, the entire market went down. So we were unusually close to the case studies we were studying, because a lot of us had investments that went from 20, 30 lakh Indian rupees down to near zero overnight. And then the next morning, you would have an ethics professor or a corporate governance professor come and talk to you about how that poor set of decisions or badly governed companies were going downhill. You were like, yeah, but I lost a lot of money. How do I get it back? I'm a student, right? And I've also amassed this loan as part of becoming a student. Anyway, fast forward to graduation time, and there were not a lot of jobs for the taking, but we took what we got. I mean, most of the batch did get placed. But the aspirations that you had coming in versus the reality that hit home when you left were quite different. They were poles apart. Right. So I started out as a salesperson, almost a frontline salesperson for IBM's consulting division. I was hired to go consult, but there wasn't anything to go consult on. So we all essentially turned into salespeople. So I did, cold calling, door-to-door sales to, CIO offices and whatnot. I did that for about a year. It was fun while it lasted, but it had to be short-lived because it wasn't my calling, right? My calling has always been around building things, right? And that's where my love for Legos also comes in, because you could take the same set of Legos and come up with something entirely different, right, in a matter of minutes. So it was always about building things. And I went back to IBM and said, hey, I love the role you gave me. It paid the bills, but I'm kind of done here. What can we do, right? So they gave me a role here in the US, working for their insurance business with Nationwide Insurance, which is an auto insurance company. So I led a reasonably large-sized agile transformation effort. Was not product management, so I'm going to kind of gloss over that a little bit here. And then, as about a year of that ended, I started looking for a job here, and I wanted to walk away from consulting and more into full-time. And that's when Yahoo's job came along. I joined Yahoo as a program manager for the Yahoo local business, essentially hyperlocal news, hyperlocal content, and hyperlocal sort of events. We built that product, launched it as an experiment, didn't do that well. And in that 1 year of building and launching, we had about 4 CEO changes. So, if you thought you knew what recession looks like, come talk to me someday about what it looks like when every 2 months the corporate strategy changes, right? So at the end of it, we got Marissa Mayer, who was a very product-focused person. And while that was happening, I was also looking to transition into product management, because product managers are the ones that kind of define what to build and work closely with engineers on how to build and all that. So as Marissa joined, we got a company strategy established on looking forward, how will the product grow, how will we execute, and things like that. And I gravitated towards this team called Identity. They seem to have really hard set of problems at their hands. And sort of what attracted me to it was this idea of a good fight, right? Because when you're working in the identity/security space, there will always be more bad actors than there is of us, right? My team, right? We had a small team at the time, less than 20 people total, right? Including product management, design, engineering, data science, abuse prevention, all of that combined was a really small team, right? But the sales pitch that worked for me was we have a big fight, we have a good reason to fight, and there's always going to be more of them, but we have to figure out how to win, right? So that was exciting. I did that. I worked in the identity team for the next 7 years. First 4 years, I essentially did job rotations within the team. So every 3 months or so, I'd go up to my manager and say, hey, what else can I learn? What else can I learn, right? That was sort of the investment in myself as well as in the team, because I was committed to sticking around long term. So I wanted to make sure I am among the best educated about the industry as well as about the product that we built, right? And as I get into the talk, I'll cover a little bit of the product and platform kind of play that I kind of learned there. And after about 4 years of being in the team, I took the responsibility of leading the team. So I became the VP of product and engineering, and later on also took responsibility for user experience and design. Excellent GM style role. I did that for another 3 years. And then, sort of middle of this year, right, as the pandemic was about to hit, I entered the job market, right? Somehow my entry into the job market is timed with these large events. I don't know how that happens, but it is. But it worked out okay this time. I wanted to focus on a more vertical specialization than a GM style role. I'd done the GM style role for a while. I kind of knew how to play the game. I was a trusted advisor to the CTO and then also to the CEO on product topics. So I had been sort of close enough to know that getting back to a GM style role is going to be okay. I can get that done. But what I really wanted was to find an opportunity where I cultivate a product organization, a product culture, and sort of drive that change, right? And that needs a little more deeper technical expertise. I say technical, i.e. from a product perspective, right? And I wanted to find an opportunity like that. And that's where Goldman Sachs came along. They're a 150-year-old large established bank. I'm sure that name rings a bell for everybody on our campuses, right? And now, if you heard their Investor Day talks for 2020, right, they are focused on turning their core competencies in the financial world into a technical advantage and sort of building on the API economy and opening up their core competencies for others to sort of utilize as services. So as part of that, they were looking to drive a culture change on how software products get built, not the financial products, but software products get built. And they were looking to hire some seasoned professionals from the Silicon Valley. So it kind of was like a match that got made. And I recently joined Goldman Sachs. So I'm going to focus my talk. I'm going to start presenting here in a minute. I'm going to focus my talk largely on the PM learnings I've had. A lot of this content is my personal, or there are a couple of references where I shamelessly stole somebody's quotation and things like that. But none of this is Goldman or Yahoo or Verizon endorsement. This is all my own content. And even after the talk, if you have thoughts, questions, ideas you want to bounce off of me, feel free to reach out. Nitika has my phone number. I'm on LinkedIn, fairly active. So feel free to reach out in any of those forums. So now let's get the Zoom screen share going, hopefully. Okay. No, okay. Trying to start it. All right. Are you able to see?
Yes, Lavnesh, it's visible.
All right, awesome. So like I said, the talk is focused on product management. So the first question, right, is what is product management? Is it an art? Is it a science, right? And the more I think about it and the more experience I've gained, I think it is more an art, less a science, because I can't figure out the formula for success for PMs. I can't figure out what is the one thing or the two things or the three ingredients that make a great PM. So it's a lot of art and less of science. It sits at the intersection of multiple disciplines, right? And we'll go through some of those in the next few slides, right? Too often, product managers get caught up in the execution rut, so they become more of a project manager and less of a product manager. And that's project management you can measure in hard skills. Product management is a lot more of these soft skills / hard to define. So let's get a little bit deeper into that, right? First thing is, as a product manager, you need to focus on the problems that you're solving, not so much on the solutions. Solutions are great. That's how the problems get solved. But sometimes once the team starts the execution, it introduces a bias. And the bias is towards execution of the solution we first talked about, or the solution we set out to deliver, right? And over time, i.e. it takes 3, 6, 9 months sometimes to deliver the solution, sometimes even longer, right? And the problems have evolved. So your job as the PM is to stay focused on the problem to make sure you're delivering the quote right solution to that problem, right? And throughout the progress of the product development cycle, you have to stay focused on the problem. This is my favorite question or word, is you focus on the whys, right? This is not just about you understanding the why. You'll see that mentioned in a lot of places, like in the 5 whys framework. People talk about sort of continuously layered 5 level of questions, all starting with why this, why this, why this, so you can get to the core of the problem, right? Core of the pain point you're trying to solve. That's important. It's well and good, but you have to extend that beyond yourself. You have to establish as the PM a shared understanding of the whys, i.e., why did we start this journey? Why did the company decide to build a certain product, or why did a startup get funded? And that answer to that why should be the same if you wake up an engineer from the sleep, or the product manager from the sleep, or a designer, or a user researcher, or any discipline, right? Everybody should have the same understanding of the why. And that the job of a PM is to make sure that shared understanding gets established and gets talked about often. You know, establishing it at the start of the product cycle, product development cycle, isn't enough. You have to repeat it. Like one of my mentors and coaches once said, repetition makes the prayer stronger, right? Religious connotations aside, the idea is that if you repeat, people will remember, and they'll be ready to repeat when it's time for them to repeat, right? And one of the tools that we've seen used a lot, and I have seen used a lot, is Amazon's sort of Jeff Bezos dictated working backwards model, where you always start from the customer. You write a document that says, that covers working from the customer value back to the product you're going to build, or the problem you're solving, how this thing adds up in terms of value to the customer, value to the business, value to the developers, and things like that, right? And those documents, those memos become a vehicle for others to be able to share your story, right? Rather than relying on a slide deck like mine with a word on each slide and everybody being able to interpret it however, right? If you wrote a memo and everybody reads the memo and that memo has all of the related information you need to make a decision, or information that was used to make a decision, it helps everybody sort of align and have a level playing field. This is something I borrowed from Martin Erickson. He's one of the PMs I follow and occasionally chat with on product thoughts, right? So on a typical product development team, there are at least 3 core functions, right? There is the business, the feasibility from a business perspective for this product to bring value to us, the company, to our customers, our key stakeholders beyond customers. The UX, the user experience, right, which makes the product usable, and the technology that makes it feasible to actually build, right? A good product manager is going to sit right at the intersection of that Venn diagram, right? They are going to focus on maximizing business value. They're going to be the voice of customer. When you talk about UX, they're going to be the voice of the user in case of consumer products, right? They're going to be the advocate for the user. When you talk about a certain user flow, they're going to be the one passionately fighting for make the flow simpler, for make the product easier to use, right? And then they're also going to partner with engineers to make sure this is feasible in the given time frame. It gives the company a competitive edge with regards to the technology choices we're making, right? So they kind of straddle all of these different skills and help sort of make those decisions. In my own sort of learnings, product management decisions or product decisions are largely done by a triad, right? You always need to have your designers, your engineers, your PMs. This is the core group that builds the product. They need to be together and aligned on a decision. And alignment is a funny thing. It is not always about gaining consensus. It is about aligning towards a direction of execution. It is okay for a PM to say, this is my prerogative, this is my decision, so I'm deciding that the product goes in a given direction, right? Based on the product manager's decision. Everybody else should align and execute versus try to build consensus. The consensus, in my mind, is not a recipe for success. So what are platforms products, right? So platforms products are products that take the commonality, sort of the central set of pieces, and turn those into products that others can also use, right? By definition, a platform provides a vast set of services and systems that you can ship to third-party developers, to third-party product companies, as well as you can use the platforms yourself. So I'll take a minute here and talk about when I went to identity, what did I realize, right? Identity in our case for Yahoo was simply speaking a flow where a user gives a username password. If the two things match, you let them in, right? On the face of it, it's a product. But behind the scenes, every Yahoo product will call us and say, is this user Lovelish? Do you think it is still Lovelish on this browser, right? Or various such questions come from system to system. So it's a platform, right? When we were sort of rebuilding this team as part of my job at Yahoo, right? New engineers would join and say, oh, is this a platform or is this a product? And the answer is it's both, right? There are a lot of products that are platforms as well as products. And I think that's what makes it even more fun and exciting to work on is you have to consume your own services as well as figure out how to externalize your services. So, like I alluded to, externalizing services that you build is key for a platform product, right? You should be using exactly what you're asking others to use, right? If you think about companies that are good platforms products, one example that comes to mind is Stripe. They started with a mission to build a payments platform for the internet, right? But is Stripe using the same platform, the same set of sort of features for their customers to pay them? I don't know the answer, but the likely answer is yes, because that's how you test, that's how you validate that the thing that you're building and that people are willing to pay for actually does what it's supposed to do, right? eBay started out as a company that wanted to build a platform for consumers, right? Stripe was a B2B platform. eBay is a consumer platform, and they both did great things by externalizing things that they built, by launching things that they built as a platform. Now let's talk about externalizing what you built already and opening up for others to use, right? And that example, the simplest one that comes to mind is social logins, right? So if you look at sign in with Google, for example, sign in with Yahoo, sign in with Facebook, now sign in with Apple, all of these were built for consumers to use on their core products, right? But then these got externalized for other parties to use. If you look at Amazon, they get a lot of credit for AWS, but they're also a seller's platform, right? That gets a lot less credit in the product space, but they started to build out a store for Amazon's own products that Amazon would sell, right? Sorry, Amazon's own sold products. But they are a very strong third-party business now, and it's flourishing, and there are PMs focused on growing that business, where it is peer-to-peer selling many times, right? And then the Apple developer ecosystem, right? Apple started out with apps will only be built by Apple's developers, and by the third or the fourth year of the iPhone, they had opened up the entire developer ecosystem, but they had kept their own QA. The reason to keep QA is quality matters, right? The end-to-end user experience matters. So a lot of these products are platforms. They don't just always brand themselves as such. And then APIs matter in this case, right? And why do I call APIs out here is by accepting that APIs matter, you treat developers of the other company as they are your first line customers. They need to be treated as customers at every touch point. That deals with technology shifts, changes you make to your technology contract between your product and theirs. And that sort of defines a little bit of the direction on how you innovate and how you move your products forward. It also defines choices you make early on in the life cycle to make sure what you choose is an extensible product and extensible platform. Again, why do companies want to invest in this space, right? Why as a business do I want to do this? Because it's recurring revenues. There's multiple revenue models. Not all are tied to like a subscription, you pay me X dollars a month, but they're all tied to one way or the other, you get a ongoing stream of revenue, right? eBay's example, you get revenue when somebody sells and somebody's buying, right? They don't have inventory holding costs, but they get money when people trade, right? Stripe's example, they get money when anybody pays another store. Shopify's example, they give you the entire store, right? Shopify creates the store for you. So they have a subscription fee and a transaction fee. So they kind of make money, on both sides of that transaction. So, getting back to people like us, right, the product managers. So what is platforms product management, right? And I'm going to take a little bit longer on this slide because I'm really passionate about this. I think this is the hardest job there is for a PM, right? And, the way I look at it is if you are a B2B product manager, you get into the shoes of that CIO, that CTO, that head of HR, whoever is buying your product, you get into their shoes and you kind of come up with the decision-making framework, the problems they're facing and the problems you want to solve for that audience, right? Whether it's the CIO, CTO, the head of HR, or whichever product you're building. If you're a B2C product manager, you end up getting into the shoes of your users, like the iPod example, right? Steve Jobs, famously was in love with music. He wanted to build something so you could carry more and more songs. So hence we got the iPod, right? So you can put yourself in the consumer's shoes. You can conduct consumer research. You can conduct all kinds of experiments to figure out what works, what doesn't. And that's that kind of a PM. Now talk about a platforms PM. Platforms PMs are generally speaking building products that are either B2B to B or B2B to C. Hardly ever do you build a platform that goes from you directly to the consumer, i.e. the end user, right? So if you take the examples of Stripe, Stripe is building APIs, or if you take the example of Shopify, maybe let's do Shopify. If you take the example of Shopify, right? Shopify is building a storefront. That storefront will have its own engineering team, its own sort of architectural direction for that engineering team. And then there is a consumer that uses that product, right? So as a PM that's building that platform, you have to put yourselves in the shoes of the developer that is integrating with you, the PM on that team, as well as the end user. So with regards to my own experience at Yahoo, right, I was the platforms product manager. I was always in the platforms organization there. And I had to build these flows, but a user never goes to the login page, right? A user doesn't say, oh, let me go log into Yahoo. They say, I want to go check my email. I want to go check my Yahoo Fantasy League or my Yahoo Finance portfolio, right? And for each of these, the user needs to be signed in, right? So now what I build should feel part of the flow, as well as the developers and the PMs on the other side should be willing to consume the newest feature I'm launching, right? So to me, I had to be in the shoes of the end user. I had to be in the shoes of the developer and the PMs on various different teams. It wasn't just one team within Yahoo, right? I was interacting with all of them. So that makes this job essentially harder than other PM's role, but also a lot more fun, right? So I'm going to dive into identity and fintech and then sort of loop back to platforms and products. So as I alluded, in my mind, all of these three are actually both. They are products and they are platforms. And we'll dive deeper into that. First thing is user experience, right? So in the case of identity, as well as privacy, as well as finance, all of us have our expectations on user experience. We kind of know, from habit and use of, banking systems and signing into various products, we have expectations as users. The PMs on these teams need to be maniacal about understanding user expectations, and when departing from it, explaining work within the flows, within the experience on why are we departing from it, and how is it valuable to the user? How does it bring quality experiences to the user? Next thing is security, right? In all of these three spaces, security is a very big deal. And it goes without saying that security should be very big deal regardless. Like in every product, if there is a security touch point, you should pay attention to it. But in all of these three spheres, security is almost like breathing, right? If you forget to breathe, there is a problem. And similarly, if you are an identity PM or a financial services PM, if you forget or overlook a security issue, that's a huge problem. So you as a PM need to be paying attention to that. There is a lot of regulation. In this one, I kind of called out more from a privacy perspective because that is an area with new regulations. There's GDPR, there's CCPA, there's a LGPD, I think the Brazil new privacy law. India is working on one. So regulation is growing faster than you can imagine right now in the financial space, also in the privacy space. So as a PM, you have to keep in touch with that and keep ahead of that. And normally, go back a second. Normally, when you look at these spaces, right, whether it is usability, whether it is security or regulation, they look like they're at odds with usability, i.e. you can have good user experience, but then you have security trade-offs. Or you can have excellent user experience, but I don't know that I can meet the regulation as it was intended. I think the key here for success for PMs is to do usability with security and regulation in mind. You don't want to put the burden of security on the user, i.e. let them choose a good password or let them be well disciplined around their banking details and whatnot. It is our job to ensure that users can't get it wrong. They have enough tools, we have enough controls in the system to make sure that they get it right. And they get it right all of the time. So just sort of diving a little bit deeper into finance, right? As I'm learning, I wanted to share a little bit of tidbits there also, right? KYC norms are a big deal. In the big tech space, we can get away with KYC having some errors. The users many times actually intentionally make errors, i.e. they will not disclose their date of birth properly. They'll use an alternate name. They'll come up with screen names that don't identify them. And that's all okay in the digital space. In the finance space, given that it's real money and sometimes it's a lot of money, the scale is huge, the user's KYC information as well as the KYC norms are fairly tight. Data protection and privacy in finance is a really big deal. So if you build a platform that powers other people's financial services, how is the consumer data protected? How is the business data protected? Who has access to the business data? Who has access to the consumer data? Because given the B2B2B or B2B2C nature of each transaction, there is layers of controls, right? Even the platform provider should not have access to view relationships, let alone specifics of data. So there is a lot of sensitivity around that, as well as legal contracts put in place to ensure that that sensitivity gets honored. The industry is ripe for disruption. If you think about it, with the cryptocurrency rise in the last maybe 5-7 years, right, as well as decentralized financial services rise, the industry is ripe for disruption. There is going to be a lot of new platforms coming out offering different capabilities. The core idea there being, let the banks and other financial institutes focus on the core of their business. Let the technology be done by platforms, right? If you are a financial services provider, your product is actually the finance, the money, and how you trade, right? It's not the technology. And sort of burdening every organization to go build its own technology is essentially going to slow down their innovation. And the idea of finance-driven platforms is essentially to take that burden away and say, here is a set of APIs, a set of capabilities that any financial services provider can use to go build the product that they should be focusing on. And I wanted to just touch upon regulation quickly again. While I talked about privacy and regulation, that's kind of a big deal. But finance is a whole another level of regulation, right? On the one hand, in privacy, regulation is up and coming, and not all the regulators also fully understand the implications of what they ask for. On the financial side, the regulation is present, it's incumbent, and it has been incumbent for many, many, many years. Now, the challenge is modernizing those regulations to today's times, right? There are rules that apply to money trading that don't equally apply to cryptocurrencies. Is that right? Is that not? Right? So there are a lot of challenges like that from a regulation perspective, and many times technology innovation has to be held back a little bit. You can do a lot more than what the regulation allows, and that's where a lot of the negotiation comes in. So the last section of my conversation or presentation here is just focusing on what makes a good platforms PM, right? And this is something that generally serves you well, regardless of which industry you're in or what role you're doing, is if you play the long game. If you inculcate the habit in yourself as well as within people around you to have long-term thinking and get your execution bias towards that long-term delivery, not towards the short-term trade-offs. Short-term trade-offs always seem urgent. They always seem like, the building's on fire. If I don't throw some water at it, it's going to burn down. But longer term focus and longer terms sort of execution is what is going to make for a great platform and a great platform PM. End-to-end UX, I touched a bit on this, right? My page isn't as a platform PM if I have a UX, if I have a page that I expose, not always will you do, but if I have one, that's not the page users come for, right? In the Yahoo example, users don't come to say, oh, let me go check login out, right? And see how it works. Nobody does that. Nobody will ever do that. In the Shopify example, nobody goes to their checkout page and say, let me see what the checkout page looks like. Or in the Amazon example, no consumer goes to the product listing page to see how the third-party seller products are shown, right? That's our job. It's our job to look end to end. Why did the consumer get here? How did they get here? And where are they going to land after they exit my platform, right? And if you have a UX, your job has to be to drive that end-to-end thinking. Every other PM that works on your product is just going to be narrowly focused. You have to be really broad. And you have to almost force them, your partners across the organizations, whether your company or outside, to look at the end-to-end picture and sort of play along. Know where the puck is going. I know it's a cliche line, but I didn't come up with anything better, so I used it. The idea here is platforms cannot play with where the industry is right now. You need to be building products that are extensible, long-lived, but also ready for where the puck is going. You have to be ready for when the industry gets here, what are we going to do, right? Almost, if you want to be successful, you almost want to be there before the industry gets there. A good example for that is actually the iPhone launch itself, right? They kind of saw where the industry was going. Another good example is AWS. AWS figured out that there was a problem in data centers in private cloud, as we call it now, right? Every company didn't want to stand up their own data centers. And even when they did, they didn't have the ability to scale. The biggest USP that AWS sells on is their elasticity and scalability, right? Horizontally and vertically, right? So they kind of saw where the industry was going, and they were able to build something for that future. This one, you might look at this and say, oh, doesn't this fly in the face of juggling and reassessing priorities? Doesn't this fly in the face of the long-term vision? It actually doesn't, right? The idea is, if you connect the dots to, a few of the things I said, if all of your decisions are tied to the whys, then reassessing priorities is not a bad idea, because you know why you're doing it, and the original whys has to be part of the story, right? If I started to build out to solve the problem X, and the problem X is valuable because Y, if I have to juggle and reassess priorities because the why has changed, or the why is there but technology has changed, we should go an alternate path. All of that is fair game. Many more such constraints are fair game, as long as we're not losing focus on the long-term vision. And this is something that is actually appreciated by many of the engineers that I've worked closely with, is my ability to go back and say, well, we started out, this was our understanding, but now look at this. So maybe we should, use an alternate approach. And, same with my designer partners, right? They love the fact that we could go back and reassess, but doesn't mean you go back to the drawing board and restart. It's about the constant improvement cycle, right? And this is also, one of the reasons why, as a PM, I don't believe in writing an amazing PRD upfront and then sort of working with the engineers to execute on it. I also believe in product discovery from a user experience, as well as from a stated end goal perspective as we go. So you define, maybe the next 3-4 weeks of work, then you work together with the design and engineers to build something. And then you kind of always rolling, for the next 3-4 weeks, keep defining what needs to get done. Data, right? We've all heard, I'm sure, enough talks and conversations around data. I think I'll leave you with two quick thoughts. First is measure what matters, right? So you need to define what matters and make sure that it is measured from day one of your product. And just remember, whatever you measure will get managed, right? If you tell your team and your organization, we're going to focus on a certain conversion metric or a certain dollar metric, everybody's just going to align and get that done, because everybody comes out to do a great job. And then if once they know how to measure it, they're just going to make that number move. There are pitfalls of this sometimes where you need to identify how measuring just one metric or just two metrics can create an environment where we're overlooking something, i.e., we can build something that works really fast, but the user experience is bad. Or we can build something that user experience is awesome, but pages load really slow. So, just taking very mundane examples, but use the data to your advantage and make sure everybody agrees on what defines success ahead of even starting the project. This one I'm passionately in love with. I like decision-making principles to be broadly shared, and I can't emphasize the value of that, right? Very similar to what I said, a common shared understanding of the whys, a common shared understanding of decision-making principles helps everybody in the team make better decisions, right? So it is not that it was Lovelash's choice that we didn't build something or we didn't prioritize something. Nobody actually, once decision principles are rolled out and teams have agreed, nobody says that, oh, my head of product said, don't go build this. They say that here are the principles we work by, and what you're asking is something that is in direct conflict, right? They're able to tell your story for you if you're able to simplify your principles to a handful and be able to socialize them so everybody knows it. Guardrails, right? When you have principles, you also need to decide guardrails, right? If there is a decision that impacts every single user that goes through your flow, you don't want that decision to be decentralized. So you need to help your team make sure that they're able to level up when things need to be leveled up. And the guardrails are what keep you, your product, and your team on track to deliver on the vision. They're also what helps build the discipline. Platforms first. So this thinking, is one that's a big cultural shift for teams, because everybody is, it's easy to get sucked into an inward focus, say, oh, I built this page or I'm responsible for that flow, and I'm just going to focus on that. But as a platform, you have to build capabilities that are going to be used for years, right? If you're building a platform that gets end of life in a year, 2 years, not a great idea. Apps do that. End user apps can be launched and end of life in 3 months or less sometimes, right? But a platform is built to live. So your thinking, your team's thinking, your evaluation on architecture choices, engineering choices, all of that has to be with a platform's first mindset. This thing is going to live. We're designing it to be extensible, to be livable. And that means sometimes at the launch of the product development cycle, the start of the product development cycle, technology teams are given more time to make the right long-term choices versus, day one, start building, start writing code. And then the next one would be consistently working backwards. Doesn't mean physically backwards, but what it means is you start with the customer, right? Every single thing you do, you build, you keep your customer in mind and in conversation. You don't go to your team and say, let's go build feature X. And they start working on building feature X. You always start with the customer. When the customer goes through this flow, here is the problem we face, or the customer faces. How should we solve it, right? And sometimes when working backwards, you tend to call yourself as a key customer of your product because you use your product every single day. And that's a fallacy to try and avoid. While you are normally speaking, a good customer of your product, if you build it only for yourself, you're going to have a problem. So you need to be open to working backwards from different customer perspectives. And almost always starting with the null hypothesis will also help, especially in the B2B2B scenario. The null hypothesis here would be that the customer doesn't really want my product, doesn't even know that they have a pain, and is not going to pay for it, right? And then you're constantly fighting that hypothesis to figure out how do you get the customer to pay for your product? How do you know that you're solving the right problem, that they're going to be willing to even have a dialogue with you? And then I'm going to wrap up with one of the best platforms PMs in the tech industry, right? He says, be stubborn on your vision, but flexible on the details, right? So be razor focused on the vision that you set out to deliver, but work closely with your key stakeholders to figure out the right details to get there. I think that's all I had. I'm open for questions now. We have about 15 minutes. We can go a little extra if needed.
All right. So yes, we have received a few questions from the audience, and I think we can start with Krupesh. Krupesh, I believe you have a question. Krupesh, can I ask you to come online?
I think there is a mute challenge, Nitika. Somebody has to unmute them.
Just a second. There you go.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Good evening, Lavlesh. Good morning to you and Sunnyvale. Thanks for your time for coming. So actually, I had a couple of questions. So first one was that, now you've been in the Bay Area for more than a decade, and, you've been a product manager. So how do you see product management coming up in India compared to the US? Firstly, and second thing is, in your career, you worked in IT products and now recently moved to financial products. So do you see some challenge as a PM working on financial platforms products? I know you mentioned about regulation, KYC, some of those, but fundamentally, any other differences which you've observed so far?
Sure. So we'll go one at a time. PM in India, right? So I do believe that product management in India as a profession is maturing, right? And I think that ties into part of the reason the Bangalore tech scene is Bangalore is the Silicon Valley of India, right? It started out as largely the place where consulting firms were hiring and setting up offices, right? Because it provided the right ecosystem. But if you look back at the last more than 5 years, maybe almost 10 years, there's a lot of technology startups coming out of Bangalore, and many of those products are getting to a global platform, right? So in my mind, product management as a role is getting to sort of the start of the hockey stick curve, where it sort of goes up in importance in the Indian context, right? And some of my PGPX classmates who have done their own startups, and I have had discussions along the same lines on the value of product management in the Bangalore market. And I'm sure, I mean, my knowledge currently or exposure is tied to Bangalore, so I'm referring to it, but I'm sure it applies to India technology scene in general, right? So the next question was around challenges of moving from a tech company to a financial company, right? So it's been a very interesting transition. Let's start there, right? Firstly, when I worked at tech companies, I was the business, right? I was a platform, but I was also the business. So if legal came to me and said, "Thou shall not do this," my response was, well, you can tell me how big of a risk it is, and I can decide whether I take it or not, right? And that's my decision, right? I own that decision. But that's not the case when I'm now working in finance, right? Finance is the business, right? Whether it is private wealth management, whether it is transaction banking, they are the business, we are the enablers, right? But if you listen to the talks on Goldman's Investor Day, at least in my case, in this situation, in a fast forward future, technology will also be the business. So that's sort of the promise with which I came. Now let's talk about the transition, right? It's interesting, or rather more than interesting now that I've been at a bank for a couple of months. The way we work is very different. The way we make decisions, like I kind of said from my technology experience, that consensus building is not big in the technology industry, right? The PMs have sort of the veto to say, here is my decision, let's execute, right? Largely sometimes in the interest of time. But given the fact that finance is, one, heavily regulated, and two, heavily documented in regards to obligations, not just to the regulators or the governments, but also to our customers, right? So it imposes interesting constraints on us, but constraints is honestly an environment in which the PMs thrive, right? Our job as PMs is to go figure out how do you deliver the best possible experiences or the best possible solutions within the given set of constraints. So far, I'm actually finding it very enjoyable. The learning curve is a bit steep, right? Because coming from high tech to an established bank with a lot of years of financial industry expertise behind their belt, so the learning curve is a bit steep, but it's an amazing journey, and I couldn't have asked for better.
Thank you, Lovelish, for taking that up. The next question I have for you is from Adi. Adi is actually joining us from London. He's a technical project manager with Google.
Mhm.
Adi, go ahead.
Did we lose him? He
He's
was on.
unmute.
He was on the video, and then I suddenly don't see him anymore. Oh, he's right there.
Adi, are you able to talk? Okay, he's not audible.
No audio, Adi.
And he is
How about
unmute.
now?
Oh yes,
Yeah,
much better.
perfect.
Excellent, excellent. Okay. Hey, Lavlesh. Firstly, thanks a lot for doing this. I think it's great for you to sort of share your experience and offer some advice. And it actually in the same tune and kind of reading the room. I think what would be on a lot of our people's minds. I think I have a sort of like really interesting question. So
Mhm.
at Google and Facebook, we have a slightly generic product hiring process. We
Mhm.
consider product managers to be fungible.
Mhm.
And over a long 30-year career, you'd be expected to create product success across multiple industries and different product areas.
Mhm.
However, when it actually gets down to the nitty-gritties of the job, across payments, maps, social, gaming, communication, B2C, B2B products, etc., and even product lifecycle, the role and the required skill set can differ considerably. And also, there's a trade-off with how domain expertise grows with time. So
Yep.
I think given that context, what would your advice be to a product aspirant or a budding PM? There is in terms of sort of the split between like the general elements of the job, that you can actually work towards developing
Mhm.
versus sort of things that become slightly more specific. So how should
Yeah.
someone sort of upskill themselves and make themselves ready for a product career?
Right. Interesting. So product career and product job, two different things. Any career and any job, two different things, right? So first part of your question was around getting hired for a job or how companies hire. So I'm actually extremely familiar with the generalist PM hiring process. We also ran that at some point at Yahoo, but then we kind of walked away from it. Um, so it works. Hiring a generalist PM and letting them go solve interesting problems works. It creates good PMs. In my mind, if you want to create great PMs, then that great PM, once on a certain team, has to spend enough time to understand the industry and become almost a domain expert within the company and then within the industry, right? I'm still on my journey to kind of establish myself at the industry, but within the companies that I've been able to earn respect, right? And I think that's where you can go from the generalist to specialist, right? When I started out as a product manager, identity wasn't my first role. I did that for Yahoo Search, I did that for Yahoo Mail, and then I did that for Yahoo Identity, right? And that's where now the vertical alignment plays a role. Is you as a PM have to fall in love with the product that you're going to be the industry specialist for, whether it is in-house or externally, right? Not all of us get enough external recognition. There's a lot of different rules of that game, right? But even within your team, if I take your example, right, Google Maps, for example, you have to be obsessed with that problem space for you to spend enough time to actually be the expert and be comfortable making a certain choice to say, yes, we're going to go in that direction, because I'm taking, a large team of engineers behind me and saying, let's go all in that direction. And I could walk all of us down a cliff, right? But before I do that, I need to have enough education. I need to have enough learning. So as a PM, always start humble. Always start with, I'm going to spend on a new product, I'm going to spend the next year or two just learning and training myself, right? And in many of those situations, you'll still have tough decisions you have to make. And that's where you start to, use a little bit of your team and the decision-making principles, right? You start to lay out principles early on that help you decide and help the team decide. And you use sort of the existing experts on the team to validate your principles before you start using them, right? But as a PM, it's amazing to start as a generalist. I think it provides you the opportunity to go try a few different roles. Like you could work on, product A, product B, product C, and then maybe product D is the one where you really find your passion, right? Passionate PMs almost are maniacal about the various aspects of being a product manager, whether it is, measuring the right metrics, whether it is driving up revenue, whether it is driving privacy controls to be simpler to use, whichever angle you come at, but that passion and that fire will come only at a given problem space. You can't be passionate about everything that Google or Facebook or any other large company is building, right? Then you're passionate about nothing. That's a whole other problem.
Absolutely. Um, thank you so much for sharing that. And I kind of agree as well. I think you start off in a specific area, and then it's really, it takes a while, maybe a year or two, before you find your footing and actually learn enough about the space to sort of start taking some decisions that a team can get behind, and actually drive impact in the medium long term.
Thank you, Adi, and thank you, Lovelesh, for taking up that question.
Sure.
We can move on to the next one. Akhilesh Bhangre has a question for you. Akhilesh, would you like to come online?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Nitika. And thank you, Lovelesh, for joining us.
Sure.
So my question is, I want to narrow down the scope of financial PM down to a global banking perspective. What I've seen in the recent years, world's biggest European and American banks have started their huge tech centers in India, and mostly they're supporting all financial operations or tech operations from India. For example, the Marcus from Goldman Sachs is being supported by Bangalore office. Can you comment on the product management opportunities or product management being done in-house by these banks and the potential opportunities in that sector?
Yeah, so I mean, I think that's no different than any global product being run out of India, right? To begin with. So Marcus, as an example, I haven't worked on Marcus, so it's kind of hard for me to comment, right? But why don't we take a different example, and I can hopefully answer your question with that, right? I, working in the US, have built products for the EU market following the sort of requirements from the EU market, right? And this had to do with products that my company at that time, Verizon Media, was building for the EU. And I've done the same for Taiwan, right? Taiwan is a very different market from the US. Maybe Taiwan's a better example, right? Taiwan's a very different market than the US. Audience is entirely different. And we were building it, supplying a product manager, engineering, everything based out of Sunnyvale, California, right here, right? So where this comes to roost from a product management perspective is, as a PM, you need to be in lockstep with your in-market contacts, right? Many times the in-market contacts are product marketing managers. Many times in-market contacts are user researchers. I was kind of lucky and blessed in that regard that I had both in market, right? And I also had some in-market PMs actually that were partnering with me, right? So you need to be able to develop empathy for the user in their context, right? So a lot of the times when we're working, we don't spend enough time on understanding the user pain point because we know of a similar pain point in our environment, right? So if you talk about Bangalore teams developing products for the US market, right? Banking in Bangalore is very different than banking in the US, right? And in some ways, banking in the US might actually feel to you that it's a generation behind traditional banking wise, right? We don't have as many of the sort of technology products that India uses, for example. However, as you work with your partners, back to my story, right? As you work with your in-market partners, you need to develop empathy for the user. One of the tools we used in my situation was essentially conduct users research in market with users that could speak English which in Taiwan is a very large population in my case, right? And we watch the entire video. So a lot of the PMs, when they get user research feedback, right, they're reading the report and kind of trying to derive product requirements or insights from those reports. We didn't do that in this context, right? And actually we abolished that practice after we learned from this experience, right? We ran the whole, like a typical user research session is a user walks into a lab, they are sitting in front of a computer, they're testing your flow, they're playing with your prototype, sorry, not really testing it, right? And they're thinking out loud as they go through this, right? And they're typically behind a FBI style glass window where people on the other side can watch them, watch their interactions and whatnot. And there are 3 to 4 cameras, facial expressions, hand movements, everything gets tracked. Eyeball, everything gets tracked, right? We watched the entire session, right? And if we had 7 users come over on a Friday in Taiwan office, that Friday in Sunnyvale, 5 to 6 people would sit and watch everything, every single movement that happened, right? And then you take detailed notes on what they thought, what they said, what they did. Because that's what you're trying to learn. You're trying to learn, when I launch this thing, how are the users going to interact and what are they going to think, right? And that once you develop that empathy for the user, you are actually poised to now build for the market as you were a local. You don't have to be in the market to be a local. You have to have empathy for the user who is local. Hopefully I answered your question, Akhilesh.
Akhilesh is again.
Yes, Lovelish. I think I've never thought of that kind of example. It was a lovely example of prototyping and getting the real-time expressions of users.
Yeah, I mean, we did that in the labs also in the Sunnyvale. We would essentially require engineers, people who are actually building the product, to also go to these sessions. Because many times as a PM, when you go and say, let's do something a different way or a certain way, you get a lot of pushback because that is harder to do, because it is more work than the simplest engineering solution, right? But if they've seen the user fumble, they've seen the user struggle, they also have that empathy. So that helps a lot.
Yeah, thank you.
Sure thing.
All right, so I think we're running short of time, but can we take one last quick comment, Lovelish, if that's okay?
Yeah.
Sagar, would you like to come online?
Good morning, Mr. Chabra, and good evening,
Hi.
everyone. So I saw your last slide, and I'm actually in the middle of reading the Everything Stored by Brad Stone, and how many times Bezos, and they mention, focus on the customer, rest everything is flexible, forest for the trees, and etc. So that's really inspiring that it is actually implemented by a lot of users. My question with that regards is, so there are times, and we try to avoid conflict as much as we can, but within the team as a leader, there are times when there's a conflict between focusing on the goals or focusing on relationships. How and when do you manage? How do you manage that? And when is the time to say, okay, fine, I'm willing to compromise on the goal, but I'm not going to let go of the relationship? And sometimes you say, okay, fine, the goal is more important. How do you maintain a balance, and how do you do it?
I'm trying to not sound arrogant here, but the goal should never be compromised, right? The reason you have a job, the reason other people on the team have a job, is the reason that that goal exists, or that goal is the reason you have a job. Sorry, the other way around, right? And I think the best relationships are the ones that stand the stress test of a conflict or a series of conflicts, right? As a PM, right, your job is to lead the team in a way that it makes the most business sense, it makes the most product sense to the team, right? You're also many times the adult supervision to the room, so you can't be flared up and aggressive and say, you know what, if you guys don't agree with my decision, to hell with you, I'm going to leave and find another job, or I'm going to fire you, right? That's not the intent. The intent is to bring your team along. That's where the adult supervision comes in, right? But to achieve that, at the beginning, at the start of your effort, you have to align on the what we're building and the why we're building. So the what has to be the problem that we're solving, not the solution again. Agree on the problem we're solving, agree on why that problem matters, right? And when there is a conflict, refer back to that, right? A good PM isn't worried about whose suggestion got accepted as the final outcome in a conflict. A good PM is not worried about, did I make the decision or did the designers come back and say this was the right thing and I barely agreed with it? Or did I make the decision or did engineering constraints drive me towards something else? That shouldn't be your bother at all, in my mind. What should be your bother is, are we sticking to the same problem space? Are we sticking to the same outcome we decided we will drive for our consumers? Are we sticking to the same goals that we set out? Goals are not, in my mind, they're not tradable for relationships. Because then the company or your product can't be successful. And if there is a strain that gets introduced, let me just take another moment here. If there is a strain that gets introduced on the why, you take the extra time, right? So there has been multiple conflicts that I came across, right? And then, depending on who the individual was, either I took them for a walk right away, a one-on-one at the end of this conflict to say, hey, here is why that decision got made. I know that doesn't make you happy, but that's the right choice long-term for our team, for our product, right? Sometimes they were too emotional to go on a walk that day. So I wait until the next week and take them out for a dinner, lunch, whatever, right? So relationship is a negotiable agreement and you can mend it, right? But the goal is not, right? Also in decisions, I'll now that I think of it, also in decisions, you have decisions that are cheap to undo, easy to undo. The cost to undo is low versus decisions where the cost to undo is high. I mean, the cost to undo is high is essentially a life and death. I'm not going to let you make the wrong choice, right? If it means that I have to essentially, go escalate to your boss or their boss or the CEO or the board, I don't care, but that's the wrong choice, it's the wrong choice. I can't stand to support it, right? But if it's a decision that is easy to undo, like a few pixels here and there, font sizes, UX minor adjustments, it's okay to put an A/B out there and let the best one win, right? Put a A/B test out there, let the best one win. Sometimes you'll have these same user experience arguments, and I'll go back to the previous example that I gave Akhilesh, right? Get a easy, quick and dirty prototype in front of 5 employees in the cafe. We just walked down to the cafe and we showed them 2 versions, 2 iPads held next to each other and said, which one of these looks better, right? And 5 out of 5 picked A or B, right? And then problem solved. It's not my choice, it's the user's choice, right? They use the product, right? So you can find cheap ways of unblocking, but don't negotiate on the goal. That's not a good idea.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Sure thing.
All right. I think that brings us to the end of the session. We're out of time and rather have exceeded it now. So, Lavlesh, I'd like to, on behalf of Connections, the PGPX batch, and the IMA community, I'd like to thank you for joining us this lovely Sunday morning. It also happens to be Dashera here, so happy Dashera to you and your family.
Thank you. Happy Dashera to you all too.
Thank you. And product management, to be honest, is an aspirational field for a lot of B School students. So today's session did help us gain fresh perspective, particularly in the finance and high-tech space when it comes to PM roles. So thank you once again, and we look forward to further opportunities to interacting with you.
Yeah, I'm reachable on LinkedIn, Twitter, anything. Just drop me a note. Just don't use my IIM email address. I check that like quarterly. Every other method will work.
Yeah, I realized that when I was trying to reach out to you.
All right. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Lavlesh. Have a good day.
Bye.